Some decisions arrive in the middle of a blizzard, wearing a face you haven't seen in 20 years, and carrying an offer that could save your daughter's future or destroy what's left of your sanity. When Caleb Hayes opened his Vermont farmhouse door that frozen January night, he expected the pizza delivery he'd ordered 40 minutes earlier. Instead, he found Vivienne Laurent standing in waist-deep snow, her black coat dusted white, her eyes holding the kind of desperation billionaires aren't supposed to feel. She'd traveled 300 miles through a winter storm to ask him one question. Would he risk everything to save her from an enemy she couldn't see? If you're curious how a broke single father became the only man a tech billionaire could trust, stay until the end. And if this story reaches you, hit the like button and drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far these words have traveled. The kitchen timer buzzed for the third time before Caleb actually heard it. He was standing at the counter in his worn flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better decades, staring at the algebra homework spread across the scratched laminate surface like hieroglyphics from a civilization he'd never understood. 14-year-old Emma sat across from him, chin propped on her fists, watching him with that particular brand of teenage patience that somehow felt worse than impatience. "Dad," she said, "the lasagna." "Right." He grabbed the oven mitts, one shaped like a moose, the other a Christmas gift from 2019 with half the reindeer pattern burned off, and yanked open the oven door. Smoke poured out in a gray cloud that made the detector shriek immediately. "Jesus Christ," Caleb muttered, waving a dish towel at the screaming plastic disc on the ceiling, while Emma dissolved into the kind of laughter that made his chest hurt in the good way. The lasagna looked like something excavated from Pompeii. "Maybe we just order pizza," Emma said, still giggling. "Pizza's expensive. Dad, it's Friday." She had him there. Friday night had been pizza night since before her mother died, back when this old Vermont farmhouse felt like a home instead of a museum of everything they'd lost. Rachel had insisted on it, cheap pepperoni from Tony's down in the village, eaten on paper plates while they watched whatever Emma picked on Netflix. The tradition survived even after Rachel didn't. Caleb looked at his daughter's face, still round with childhood despite her best efforts to contour it into something more sophisticated, and felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The weight that whispered he was failing her, that she deserved better than frozen lasagna disasters and a father who couldn't solve basic algebra at 32 years old. "Pepperoni?" he asked. "Extra cheese." "You got it." He grabbed his phone from the counter. The screen cracked in one corner from the time he dropped it while changing the truck's oil, and pulled up Tony's number. The call connected after 2 rings. "Tony's Pizza, this is Marco." "Hey, it's Caleb Hayes. Can I get a large pepperoni with extra cheese for delivery?" "Sure thing, Caleb. Gonna be about 45 minutes, though. Roads are garbage tonight." Caleb glanced toward the kitchen window. Snow had been falling since noon, the kind of heavy, wet snow that turned country roads into skating rinks and made the 20-minute drive into town feel like crossing the Arctic. The thermometer outside read 14 degrees. "No problem," Caleb said. "We're not going anywhere, sorry." He hung up and returned to the algebra homework, determined to crack at least one problem before admitting defeat. Emma had already moved on to her phone, scrolling through Instagram with the glazed expression of someone watching their entire generation live better lives in filtered photographs. "How's school?" Caleb asked, knowing it was the wrong question the moment it left his mouth. "Fine. Make any new friends?" "Dad?" "What?" "You ask me that every week." "So?" "So the answer's the same every week." Emma looked up from her phone, and for just a second, Caleb saw something raw in her eyes. Something lonely and tired that no 14-year-old should feel. Nobody wants to be friends with the weird, quiet girl whose mom died. The words landed like a punch. Caleb opened his mouth, searching for something helpful, something fatherly, something that wouldn't sound like the empty platitudes guidance counselors offered. Nothing came. "You're not weird," he finally managed. "I collect bird feathers, and I've read the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy 4 times. That's not weird, that's interesting. In what universe?" "In the universe where I'm your dad and I make the rules." Emma rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth twitched. "You're such a dork. Takes one to know one." They fell back into comfortable silence, the kind they'd perfected over the last 4 years. The kind that filled the spaces where Rachel used to be. Outside, The wind howled against the farmhouse's old bones, making the windows rattle and the exposed beams creak. The furnace kicked on with its usual death rattle, pumping lukewarm air through vents that probably needed cleaning but never quite made it to the top of Caleb's endless list of deferred maintenance. This was his life now, this small, quiet, manageable life. He'd built it deliberately after everything fell apart, after Rachel's cancer diagnosis, after watching her shrink into someone he barely recognized, after the funeral where Emma had stood silent and dry-eyed while Caleb fell apart in front of everyone who'd driven up from Boston to witness his grief. After the well-meaning friend stopped calling and the casseroles stopped appearing on the porch and reality settled in like November frost. He'd walked away from the world he'd known before. The competitive tech scene in Boston, the startup culture that ran on ambition and cocaine and 19-hour workdays. He'd sold everything he owned, bought this farmhouse for cash, and built a life small enough that it couldn't hurt him anymore. Small town. Small job doing IT work for the county government. Small dreams. Safe. The knock came at 8:17, 43 minutes after he'd placed the order. "Pizza's here," Emma said, not looking up from her phone. Caleb pushed back from the table and headed for the front door, already reaching for his wallet. The porch light was out. It had been out for 3 months, so he flipped on the hallway light before, pulling open the heavy wooden door that Rachel had insisted on refinishing the summer before she got sick. The woman standing on his porch wasn't holding pizza. She was holding herself against the wind like someone drowning, her black wool coat covered in snow, her dark hair plastered to her face, her breath coming in visible clouds. For a second, Caleb's brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. It felt like looking at a photograph that had fallen through a crack in time. "Vivian? You sure you're wrong?" She looked up at him, and even through the snow and the darkness, and the 20 years since he'd last seen her face, her eyes were exactly the same, sharp, relentless. The kind of eyes that saw through walls and excuses and every defense you'd ever built. "Hello, Caleb." His brain stuttered. Vivian Laurent, standing on his porch, in the middle of a blizzard, in rural Vermont. Vivian Laurent, who'd been his best friend from age 7 to age 12, back when they were weird kids in Boston who spent their weekends building computers from salvaged parts and talking about changing the world. Vivian Laurent, who disappeared into some elite boarding school in Connecticut while Caleb stayed behind in public school, their friendship dissolving the way childhood friendships do when life pulls people in different directions. Vivian Laurent, who now ran one of the most powerful cybersecurity companies in America. He'd seen her on the cover of Forbes 6 months ago, looking like she could cut diamonds with her jawline. The article called her "the woman who makes hackers cry" and estimated her net worth at somewhere north of $4 billion. "What are you doing here?" The words came out stupider than he'd intended. "I need your help." "My help?" "Yes." "Vivian, I haven't seen you in 20 years. I know exactly how long it's been." She stepped forward, and the porch light, the one that was supposed to be broken, caught her face. She looked exhausted. Not tired, but exhausted in the way that suggested she'd been running on fumes for so long she'd forgotten what rest felt like. "Can I come inside?" Every instinct told him to say no, to close the door, to protect the small, safe life he'd built from whatever chaos she'd brought with her. "Dad?" Emma's voice drifted from the kitchen. "Everything okay?" Caleb looked back at Vivian, standing in his doorway like a ghost made flesh, and made the second decision that would change everything. "Come in." He stepped aside. Vivian entered, bringing the smell of winter and expensive perfume and something else, something sharp and electric that made the farmhouse feel smaller just by her presence. She pulled off her coat, revealing a black turtleneck and designer jeans that probably cost more than Caleb's truck. Her boots left puddles of melting snow on the hardwood floor Rachel had insisted on preserving. "Who's that?" Emma appeared in the hallway, eyes wide. "Emma, this is Vivian. She's an old friend." "Hi, Emma." Vivian's voice softened in a way Caleb remembered from childhood. She'd always been good with people when she wanted to be. "You look just like your dad." "Everyone says that." Emma studied Vivian with the naked curiosity of someone who'd grown up in a town where strangers were rare and interesting strangers were rarer. "Are you the pizza lady?" "No," Caleb said. "Pizza's still coming. Emma, can you give us a minute?" "Yeah." Emma's eyes narrowed. She knew dismissal when she heard it, but she nodded and retreated to the kitchen. Caleb heard the chair scrape and knew she was absolutely listening from the other room. He turned back to Vivian. Up close, the exhaustion was more obvious. Dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. A tightness around her mouth that suggested chronic stress. She looked like someone holding together by will alone. "Living room?" she asked. "Yeah." He led her into the cramped space that served as their living room, family room, and TV room. The furniture was mismatched and old, the kind you bought at estate sales and learned to love. Rachel's needlepoint pillows still covered the couch. Emma's photography books were stacked on the coffee table next to Caleb's collection of fantasy novels he pretended not to still read. Vivian sat on the edge of the couch like she was preparing for negotiation, not conversation. Caleb took the armchair across from her, suddenly aware of how small his life must look through her eyes. How ordinary. "How did you find me?" he asked. "I've always known where you were." "What?" "I keep track of people I care about." She said it like it was obvious, like it was normal to maintain surveillance on childhood friends you hadn't spoken to in 2 decades. "I knew when you got married, when Rachel got sick, when she died. I'm sorry I didn't reach out." The words should have felt invasive. Instead, they felt oddly comforting. Someone had been watching. Someone had cared. "Why are you here, Vivian?" She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and for the first time since she'd appeared on his porch, she looked uncertain. Vivian Laurent, billionaire CEO, looking uncertain. "My company is being destroyed from the inside. Okay? Someone is leaking classified security protocols, client data, proprietary code, everything that makes my company valuable." Her voice stayed level, but her hands balled into fists. Her voice stayed. 3 major clients have terminated their contracts in the last 2 months. Our stock price dropped 38%. The board is talking about forcing me out. I'm sorry, but I still don't understand what this has to do with me. I've hired 4 different security firms, brought in the FBI, implemented new protocols. Nothing works. She met his eyes. Whoever's doing this knows exactly how my systems work. They know every defense, every countermeasure, every trap I set. It's someone close to me, someone I trust. And you think I can help because you're the best analyst I've ever known. Caleb actually laughed. "Vivian, I was good when I was 22 and working at some startup that doesn't exist anymore. I've been doing basic IT for a county government for 4 years. I reset passwords and fix printer jams. You were never just good, you were brilliant." Her intensity was uncomfortable, like standing too close to a fire. "You saw patterns nobody else saw. You understood systems at an intuitive level that I've never found in anyone else. That doesn't just disappear. It does when you stop using it." "I don't believe that." "Well, believe it." He stood up, suddenly needing distance. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this. I really am. But you've got the wrong guy. There are thousands of security experts in New York who can— I don't want security experts. I want someone I can trust absolutely." She stood too, closing the distance he'd tried to create. "Someone who has no connection to my world, no ulterior motives, no agenda except finding the truth." "You haven't seen me in 20 years. How do you know you can trust me?" "Because I know you, Caleb." Her voice dropped, becoming something softer and more dangerous. "I know you walked away from a 6-figure job to take care of your wife. I know you sold everything to give Emma stability. I know you're the kind of person who still exists in a world where most people don't." Right. The words hit harder than they should have. Caleb turned away, looking at the window where snow continued to fall in the darkness beyond. "Even if I wanted to help, which I don't, I can't just pick up and move to New York. I have a daughter, a job, a life. I'll pay you $5 million. The number hung in the air like smoke. Caleb turned slowly. "What?" $5 million. Transferred to whatever account you want the day you start. Vivian's face showed no emotion. This was business now. Plus all expenses, housing in Manhattan, private school for Emma, health insurance, whatever you need. Can't be serious. "I'm always serious about money." She moved closer. "I'm not asking you to do this forever. 6 months, maybe less if you're as good as I remember. Find whoever's destroying my company, and you walk away with enough money to secure Emma's future forever. I don't want your money. Yes, you do. She said it gently, without judgment. You want Emma to go to college without drowning in debt. You want her to have opportunities you can't give her working IT in rural Vermont. You want to stop lying awake at night wondering if you're failing her by choosing safety over ambition. You don't know what I want. Then tell me I'm wrong. He couldn't want. Every word she'd said was true, and they both knew it. The knock came again. Actually, the pizza this time. Caleb welcomed the interruption, grateful for an excuse to escape Vivian's orbit. He paid Marco an extra 20 for driving in the storm, then carried the pizza back to the kitchen where Emma had abandoned all pretense of not listening. Is she famous? Emma whispered. Kind of. Is she rich? Very. Why is she here? I'm still figuring that out. He left the pizza with Emma and returned to the living room where Vivian stood examining the photographs on the mantel. Pictures of Emma at various ages. A wedding photo of Caleb and Rachel looking impossibly young. A snapshot of 12-year-old Caleb and Vivian covered in mud after building what they'd called the greatest treehouse in Boston in her parents' backyard. I remember that day, Vivian said without turning around. We worked for 6 weeks on that treehouse. Your dad made us tear it down after 3 days because it violated some building code. He was always good at crushing dreams. She touched the frame lightly. You were the only person who ever made me feel normal. Like I wasn't some weird girl who understood computers better than people. You weren't weird. We were both weird. That's why it worked. Caleb sat back down in the armchair, suddenly feeling the weight of the entire day. The burned lasagna. The algebra he couldn't solve. The daughter who collected bird feathers and had no friends. The life he'd built that felt smaller with every passing year. I can't do this, he said quietly. Can't or won't. Does it matter? Yes. Vivian turned to face him. Can't means you're incapable. Won't means you're afraid. Maybe I'm both. I don't believe that either. You keep saying that. Because I know you better than you think. She crossed the room and sat down on the coffee table directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. You're not incapable, Caleb. You're exhausted. You spent years taking care of Rachel, watching her die, holding Emma together, and building a life so small and controlled that nothing can hurt you again. But you're drowning here. You're 40 years from retirement doing work that bores you to death, raising a daughter who deserves to see you be more than a man, hiding from his own potential. That's not fair. Fair doesn't matter. True matters. You don't know anything about my life. Then tell me I'm wrong. She leaned forward. Tell me you're happy. Tell me Emma's thriving. Tell me this is the life you dreamed about when we were 12 years old and planning to change the world together. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to defend the choices he'd made, wanted to explain that happiness was overrated and safety was undervalued and she had no right to appear after 20 years and judge him, but the words wouldn't come. 6 months, Vivian said softly. Help me find who's destroying everything I've built. If you hate it, you walk away with $5 million and never hear from me again. If you don't hate it, she paused. Well, we'll figure that out together. And if I say no, then I respect your decision and disappear back into the storm. She stood, pulling her coat back on. But I think you'll say yes. Why? Because you're not the kind of person who turns away from someone asking for help. You never were. She moved toward the door and Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Some combination of fear and excitement and possibility that he hadn't felt since before Rachel got sick, since before he'd learned that dreams were dangerous and safety was everything. Wait. Vivian stopped, hand on the doorknob. If I did this, and I'm not saying I am, what would it actually involve? She turned back, and for the first time since arriving, she smiled. It transformed her face, making her look less like a billionaire CEO and more like the girl who'd climbed trees and built computers and believed anything was possible. It would involve you and Emma moving to Manhattan. You'd work directly with me, reporting to no one else. Full access to all systems, all personnel, all data. Complete authority to investigate however you see fit. Emma would have to change schools in the middle of the year. She'd attend Thornton Academy, best private school in the city. Small classes, incredible teachers, students who actually give a damn about learning. She's shy. She doesn't make friends easily. Neither did we. Vivian moved back toward him. But we found each other. Maybe she'll find people who get her too. This is insane. Most worthwhile things are. Caleb looked past her toward the kitchen, where Emma sat eating pizza alone at the table where they'd shared 1,000 quiet dinners. He thought about the algebra homework he couldn't help her with, the college fund that wouldn't cover a single semester at a decent school, the future he was giving her by choosing safety over everything else. I need to think about it, he heard himself say. Of course. Vivian pulled a business card from her coat pocket. Actual paper, expensive and embossed. My personal number. Call me when you decide. And if I don't call, then I'll know your answer. She headed for the door again, and this time Caleb let her go. Let her step back into the storm and disappear into the wall of white beyond his porch. Let the cold air rush in before he closed the door against it. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, holding her business card, feeling the texture of the expensive paper between his fingers. Dad? Emma stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a slice of pizza. Yeah? Are you going to do it? Do what? Whatever she wants you to do. Emma took a bite of pizza, chewing thoughtfully. You should. Why? Because you look more alive than you have in 4 years. The observation hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to deny it, to explain that he was perfectly fine, that their life was perfectly fine, that they didn't need Vivian Laurent or her billions or her problems. But Emma had already returned to the kitchen, leaving him alone with the truth. That night, after Emma went to bed, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and Vivian's business card next to his coffee mug. He pulled up her company's website, Laurent Security Solutions, the logo sleek and modern and expensive looking. The homepage featured a video of Vivian speaking at some tech conference, looking powerful and confident and absolutely nothing like the exhausted woman who'd stood on his porch. He clicked through to the news section. The headlines told the story she'd outlined. Laurent Security loses major contract with Defense Department. Stock price tumbles amid security concerns. Investors question Laurent's leadership. Someone was destroying her, methodically, professionally. He thought about Emma upstairs in her bedroom, probably still awake, probably scrolling through Instagram and looking at lives that seemed more interesting than hers. He thought about the college applications they'd start filling out in a few years, and the financial aid forms that would reveal exactly how little he could offer her. He thought about the life he was giving her, safe and small and utterly forgettable. Then he thought about the life he could give her. $5 million, a world-class education, opportunities he couldn't even imagine. All he had to do was say yes to a woman he hadn't seen in 20 years, walk away from everything he'd built, risk the safety he'd fought so hard to create. The smart choice was obvious, the safe choice. But Vivian had been right about one thing. He'd stopped making smart choices a long time ago. He'd started making safe ones. His phone sat next to the laptop. Her number was already in his contacts. He'd added it while she was still sitting in his living room, some part of him already knowing how this would end. 3 a.m, too late to call. Too early to make a decision that would change everything. He picked up the phone anyway. It rang twice before she answered, her voice alert and professional, like she'd been expecting his call at exactly this moment. Caleb, I have conditions. A pause. Then, I'm listening. Emma comes first, always. If this doesn't work for her, we leave immediately, no questions asked. Agreed. I want complete autonomy. You hired me to find the truth, so I do it my way. No interference. Agreed. And if I find something you don't want to know, if the person destroying your company turns out to be someone you care about, I'm still reporting it. I wouldn't expect anything less. He took a breath, feeling like he was standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark. When do we start? He could hear the smile in her voice. How soon can you be in New York? The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday morning exactly 2 weeks after Caleb had made the call that changed everything. He stood in the driveway watching 2 men in company uniforms load the last of their furniture, what little they were bringing, into the cargo hold. Most of what filled this farmhouse would stay behind, sold with the property or donated to whoever wanted the remnants of their old life. Rachel's needlepoint pillows, the mismatched estate sale furniture, the kitchen table where they'd shared 4 years of quiet dinners. Emma sat on the porch steps, headphones on, staring at her phone with the determined blankness of someone pretending not to feel anything at all. She'd been like that since he told her they were leaving, cooperative but distant, helpful but unreachable. She'd packed her room in silence, sorted through her belongings with mechanical efficiency, and answered every question about how she felt with variations of fine and whatever you think is best. It was killing him. "That's the last of it," one of the movers called out. "You folks ready to head out?" Caleb looked back at the farmhouse, white paint peeling on the shutters, the porch light still broken, the chimney that needed repointing before winter really hit. He'd bought this place thinking it would be their forever home, the refuge where he and Emma would heal and rebuild and eventually remember how to be happy again. Instead, it had become a museum, a shrine to grief and safety and all the ways he'd learned to stop wanting things. "Yeah," he said. "We're ready." The drive to New York took 6 hours through late October landscape that looked like something from a postcard. Trees burning red and gold. Small towns with white church steeples and corner stores that still sold penny candy. The kind of America that people wrote folk songs about and pretended still existed everywhere. Emma stayed silent most of the way, earbuds in, watching the world slide past her window. Caleb tried twice to start a conversation and gave up after getting one-word responses. The radio filled the space between them with NPR voices discussing politics he barely followed anymore. Somewhere around Hartford, his phone rang. Vivian's name lit up the screen. "Hey," he answered, putting it on speaker. "Where are you?" "About 2 hours out." "Awesome, Bob." "Good. The apartment is ready. I sent you the address and access codes." A pause. "How's Emma holding up?" Caleb glanced at his daughter, who gave no indication she was listening despite the fact that Vivian's voice filled the truck. "She's okay." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got right now." "Fair enough." The sound of papers shuffling came through the line. "I've got meetings until 7, but I'll stop by around 8 to go over everything. Unless you need me sooner." "Wo's do ban bother the showcase." "Eight's fine." "Caleb." Her voice shifted, becoming something softer. "I know this is hard, but you made the right choice." "You keep saying that." "Because I keep believing it." She hung up before he could respond. Emma pulled out one earbud. "She seems intense," Emma said. "She's always been intense. Were you guys, together? Back when you were kids?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "No, we were friends." "Just friends?" "Us. Just friends." He merged into the left lane to pass a semi. "Why?" Emma shrugged, putting the earbud back in. "Just wondering." Manhattan appeared gradually, like a mirage solidifying in the distance. First the skyline, then the bridges, then the overwhelming density of it all. Cars everywhere. People everywhere. Buildings stacked so high they blocked out the sky. Caleb felt his chest tighten as traffic swallowed them, pulling them deeper into the current of city life. The GPS directed them to the Upper West Side, to a street lined with pre-war buildings that probably cost more per square foot than his entire farmhouse. He found parking in an underground garage where a monthly spot cost more than his Vermont mortgage payment, then grabbed their suitcases while Emma stood on the sidewalk looking up at the building like it might eat her. "This is where we're living?" she asked. "For now." "Dad, this is insane." She wasn't wrong. The lobby featured marble floors and crown molding and a doorman who greeted them like they belonged there. The elevator was newer than anything in their farmhouse, rising smoothly to the 14th floor where it opened onto a hallway that smelled like expensive cleaning products and old money. Apartment 14C. Caleb punched in the access code Vivian had sent, and the door swung open onto a space that made him freeze in the doorway. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Hardwood floors that actually gleamed. A kitchen with appliances that looked like they belonged in a spaceship. Furniture that matched. Art on the walls that wasn't mass-produced prints from Target. "Holy shit," Emma breathed. "Language." "Dad, seriously, look at this place." He was looking. He was also calculating what it must cost per month and feeling his stomach turn over. This wasn't just generous, this was obscene. Emma had already dropped her backpack and was exploring the space with the kind of open wonder she hadn't shown in years. She found her bedroom, twice the size of her Vermont room, with its own bathroom and a desk positioned by a window with a view that probably cost extra, and actually smiled. "Can I really have this room? It's yours." She disappeared inside, and Caleb heard her moving around, opening drawers, testing the mattress. The sound of his daughter being excited about something felt so foreign it made his throat tight. His phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. "Settling in okay?" He typed back, "This apartment is too much." Her response came immediately. "You're saving my company. It's not enough." "I haven't saved anything yet." "You will." Mwah. He pocketed the phone and moved to the windows. Central Park stretched out below, a canyon of green cutting through the gray city. Joggers on the paths, dogs being walked, kids on playgrounds, life happening everywhere at once, chaotic and messy and completely opposite of everything he'd built in Vermont. "Dad?" Emma appeared beside him, looking smaller than she had in years. Beside, "Are we really doing this?" "Yeah, we really are. What if I hate it here? Then we leave. That's the deal." "And what if you hate it?" He looked down at her, his daughter who collected bird feathers and read fantasy novels and had spent 4 years watching him choose safety over everything else. "Then we leave," he repeated. "But maybe we give it a real chance first, eh?" She nodded, then leaned against him in that way she used to when she was small and the world felt too big. They stood there together, watching the city move below them, and Caleb tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Vivian arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, looking like she'd stepped out of a boardroom photo shoot. Black suit, heels that brought her eye level with Caleb, hair pulled back in a way that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. She carried a leather messenger bag that probably cost more than his truck and moved through the apartment like she owned it, which she probably did. "Emma's asleep?" she asked, noticing the closed bedroom door. "Tired from the drive. Good." She set the bag on the dining table and started pulling out files. "We have a lot to cover." "Vivian, before we start, the apartment's too expensive, I know. You already texted me." She looked up with an expression that suggested this conversation was boring her. "I own the building, Caleb. I'm not charging you rent." "You own the building." "I own several buildings. It's a good investment, Tom." She returned to the files. "Can we focus on why you're actually here?" He moved to the table, looking at the documents she'd spread out. Organizational charts, security logs, employee files, financial reports. The guts of her company laid bare. Laurent Security Solutions employs 347 people across 4 offices, Vivian began, her voice shifting into presentation mode. New York headquarters, satellite offices in San Francisco, London, and Singapore. We provide cybersecurity services to Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and private clients who need discretion along with protection. What kind of discretion? The kind where our client list isn't public and our NDAs have teeth. She pulled out a tablet, swiping through screens. We've had 3 major security breaches in the last 4 months. Each one targeted different clients, different systems, different vulnerabilities. But the pattern is clear. Whoever's doing this has intimate knowledge of our infrastructure. Caleb studied the timeline she showed him. The breaches were spaced exactly 3 weeks apart, each one more damaging than the last. What did you lose? First breach. Client communications with a defense contractor. Embarrassing but not catastrophic. Second breach. Proprietary encryption protocols we'd developed for a banking consortium. They terminated their contract immediately. Third breach. Personal information on executives at a pharmaceutical company we were protecting. 2 of them received blackmail attempts within 48 hours. And the FBI, found nothing. Her jaw tightened. They interviewed employees, analyzed our systems, made recommendations we'd already implemented, then basically told me it was an inside job and closed the investigation. Because they couldn't prove anything, or because they didn't want to? Does it matter? It's all just something you what? Caleb picked up one of the employee files. Daniel Kwan, Chief Operating Officer. The photo showed a man in his mid-40s with sharp features and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tell me about your leadership team. Daniel's been with me since the beginning. We started the company together 8 years ago. She said it matter-of-factly, but something in her voice suggested history. He handles operations while I focus on strategy and client relations. Before Laurent Security, he ran a consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. Married? Divorced. No kids. Works about 90 hours a week and considers that a slow week. Sounds familiar. Caleb set down Daniel's file and picked up the next one. Sarah Chen, Chief Technology Officer. Late 30s, MIT graduate, looked tired even in her corporate headshot. What about her? Sarah's brilliant. Possibly more brilliant than me, though she'd never admit it. Vivian pulled up something on her tablet. She came over from Google 3 years ago. Took a pay cut to join us because she wanted to build something meaningful instead of optimizing ad algorithms. Family? Partner and 2 kids. She's usually out the door at 6 to make it home for dinner, which I respect even though Daniel thinks it shows lack of commitment. They went through the rest of the leadership team, then key employees, then contractors and vendors. Caleb made notes on his own laptop, already building a mental map of relationships and dependencies and potential vulnerabilities. It felt good to use this part of his brain again, the part that saw patterns, the part that understood how systems broke down and people failed and trust became a weapon. I want full access, he said. Every system, every log, every piece of data you have. Well, you'll have it. And I want to interview people, starting with your leadership team. Vivian's expression flickered with something that might have been concern. They won't like that. I don't care if they like it. I mean, they'll resist. Daniel especially. He's going to see you as a threat. Am I a threat? To whoever's destroying my company? Yes. She closed the tablet. To everyone else, that depends on what you find. They worked until past midnight, going through logs and reports and incident timelines. Vivian had a mind like a steel trap, remembering details from months ago without checking notes, making connections Caleb hadn't seen yet. It reminded him of being 12 years old and watching her debug code he couldn't even understand. You should sleep, she said finally, rubbing her eyes. You start officially tomorrow. What time? 9. I'll introduce you to the team at a morning meeting. She stood, gathering her files. And Caleb, don't let them intimidate you. Half of them are terrified you're here to fire them, and the other half think you're a waste of money. Prove them all wrong. No pressure. You wanted autonomy. This is what autonomy looks like. She headed for the door, then paused. How are you really doing with all this? The question surprised him. Honestly, I don't know yet. That's fair. She opened the door. But for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Even though I haven't done anything yet? Especially because you haven't done anything yet. She smiled, that same smile from childhood that suggested she knew something he didn't. Sleep well, Caleb. Laurent Security Solutions occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown that made Caleb's apartment building look modest. The elevator required a security card to access the 43rd floor, where it opened onto a reception area that screamed expensive and modern and don't waste our time. Caleb Hayes. He told the receptionist, a young woman whose name tag read Melissa and whose smile looked practiced. I'm supposed to meet Vivian Laurent. Of course, Mr. Hayes. She's expecting you. Melissa picked up a phone and spoke quietly, then gestured toward a seating area. Someone will be right with you. He sat on a chair that was more art installation than furniture and watched employees move through the space. They all looked younger than him, more polished, more confident, like they belonged in this world of glass towers and security cards and 6-figure salaries. Mr. Hayes, a woman in her 30s approached, wearing the kind of business casual that still cost more than his entire wardrobe. She had the efficient energy of someone with too much to do and not enough time to do it. I'm Jessica, Ms. Laurent's executive assistant. She's finishing up a call, but she asked me to get you started with your credentials and security access. She handed him a badge on a lanyard. This gives you access to all floors, all systems, and all secure areas. Miss Laurent was very specific that you should have unrestricted access. Thanks. Conference room 3 is set up for the morning meeting. Can I get you coffee? Water? Coffee would be great. Black. What? She nodded and disappeared, leaving him alone with his badge and his growing sense that he was wildly out of his depth. He'd spent the last 4 years in county IT, where the most complex security issue was remembering to lock the server room. Now he was supposed to investigate corporate espionage at a company worth billions. Caleb! Vivian appeared from around a corner, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who considered walking slowly a waste of time. She'd swapped yesterday's suit for a different suit that probably also cost a month of his old salary. Her hair was down today, falling just past her shoulders, which somehow made her look younger and more dangerous at the same time. Ready to meet the team? As ready as I'll ever be. She led him through a maze of corridors lined with offices and conference rooms and open workspace areas where people typed on laptops and spoke in low voices. Everything was clean and modern and precisely designed to project competence and security. The irony wasn't lost on him. Conference room 3 turned out to be a glass-walled space with a table that could seat 20 and screens on every wall. 5 people were already seated, their conversations dying as Vivian and Caleb entered. "Good morning." Vivian moved to the head of the table, and Caleb took a seat near her. "I know I said this meeting was about Q4 planning, but I lied. We're here because I want to introduce you to Caleb Hayes, who's joining us as a special investigator reporting directly to me." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush glass. The silence that Daniel Kwan sat at the far end of the table, his expression carefully neutral in a way that suggested practiced control. Next to him was Sarah Chen, who looked even more tired in person than in her headshot. The other 3 Caleb recognized from the files Vivian had shown him. Marcus Webb, Chief Financial Officer, Jennifer Park, Head of Client Relations, and Thomas Reed, Director of Internal Operations. "Investigator," Daniel repeated, his voice smooth and measured. "That's an interesting word choice." "It's an accurate word choice." Vivian didn't blink. "We've had 3 major breaches in 4 months. The FBI investigation went nowhere. Our stock price is in free fall. I'm bringing in someone I trust absolutely to find out what's happening." "And Mr. Hayes' qualifications are?" This from Marcus, who had the pinched expression of someone doing unpleasant math in his head. "Extensive." Vivian offered no elaboration. Sarah leaned forward. "With all due respect, we've already been through this with the FBI, with external auditors, with 2 different security firms you hired. What makes you think one more investigation will find something everyone else missed?" "Because everyone else had agendas and limitations." Vivian's voice stayed level. "Caleb has neither. He has complete authority to access any system, interview any employee, and investigate any lead he deems relevant. And before anyone asks, yes, that includes all of you." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. "This is insulting," Daniel said quietly. "We've given everything to this company. Sacrificed relationships, health, sleep, and now you're treating us like suspects." "I'm treating everyone like suspects," Vivian corrected, "because someone in this company is destroying it from the inside, and I'm done pretending otherwise." "So we're all guilty until proven innocent?" Jennifer's voice had an edge that suggested she'd been waiting to say this. "That's your leadership strategy?" "My leadership strategy is survival." Vivian stood, placing both hands on the table. "This company employs 347 people. They have mortgages, kids in college, medical bills. Their livelihoods depend on us staying solvent. So yes, I'm willing to make you uncomfortable if it means protecting them." Thomas, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. "How long will this investigation take?" "As long as necessary," Caleb said, speaking for the first time. All eyes turned to him. "But I'll move as quickly as possible. I know this is disruptive." Disruptive. Daniel let the word hang in the air. "That's one way to describe it." "I'm not here to make friends," Caleb continued. "I'm here to find whoever's destroying this company. If you're not involved, you have nothing to worry about. If you're involved, I'll find out." "Confident," Sarah observed. "Let's hope you're as good as that confidence suggests." The meeting lasted another 20 minutes, covering logistics and access and expectations. Caleb could feel the hostility radiating from every person at the table, could see the way they looked at him like he was an infection introduced into their system. He didn't blame them. If someone had showed up at his old job with unlimited authority to investigate everyone, he'd have been pissed too. When it finally ended, the leadership team filed out in silence. Only Sarah lingered, approaching Caleb as he gathered his notes. "A word of advice," she said quietly. "Daniel's been Vivian's right hand for 8 years. They built this company together. If you go after him without concrete evidence, she'll choose him over you every time." Why are you telling me this, Wa? Because you seem like someone who might actually find something, and I'd hate to see you waste your time on the wrong target. She glanced toward where Vivian stood talking to Jennifer. "We all have secrets, Mr. Hayes. Make sure you're looking for the ones that actually matter." She left before he could respond. That evening, Caleb returned to the apartment to find Emma sitting at the dining table, homework spread around her like a paper explosion. She looked up when he entered, her expression carefully neutral. "How was your first day?" she asked. "Interesting. How was yours?" "Also interesting." She returned to her notebook, where she was working on what looked like chemistry equations. Everyone at Thornton Academy is either incredibly rich or incredibly smart, sometimes both. Which one are you? Neither. I'm the scholarship case who got in because her dad knows someone important. She said it without bitterness, just stating a fact. There's a girl in my English class whose family owns half of Connecticut. Another kid's dad invented some algorithm that's worth like $1 billion. Caleb sat down across from her. "Did anyone talk to you?" "A few people, mostly to ask where I'm from and why I transferred mid-year." She chewed on her pencil. "I told them my dad got a new job and we moved from Vermont." That seemed to satisfy their curiosity. "Make any friends?" "Dad, it's been 1 day." "Right, sorry." They sat in silence for a moment, the city humming beyond the windows. Emma had already transformed her room, photography books on the shelves, her collection of bird feathers arranged on the windowsill, the familiar chaos of her life imported into this pristine space. "There's a photography club," she said suddenly. "They meet on Thursdays after school. I was thinking maybe I'd check it out." Something in Caleb's chest loosened. "Yeah? Don't make it weird." "I'm not making it weird." "Oh, you're making it weird." But she was almost smiling. "It's just a club, doesn't mean anything." "Noted." His phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. "Dinner meeting canceled. Want to grab food and debrief?" Emma saw him looking at his phone. "Is that her?" "Yeah." "You should go." "I should stay with you." "Dad, I'm 14, not 4. I can order takeout and do my homework without supervision." She gestured toward the door. "Go. Do your investigating thing." He hesitated, then texted back. "Where?" Vivian's response came immediately. "There's a Thai place 2 blocks south. Meet you there in 20. The restaurant was small and cramped and smelled incredible. Vivian was already seated at a corner table when Caleb arrived, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look almost normal, almost like the girl he'd known instead of the billionaire she'd become. "I ordered us the chef's special," she said as he sat down. "Hope you still like spicy food." "How do you remember that?" "I remember everything about you." She said it casually, like it wasn't a loaded statement. "How'd Emma's first day go?" "Better than mine, probably. She's thinking about joining the photography club." "That's good. She's talented." "You've never seen her work." "I've seen the photos you have on your phone." At his expression, she added, "You showed me pictures the night I came to Vermont. I have a good memory." O'Toole. The food arrived, steaming plates of pad thai and green curry, and spring rolls that tasted like they'd been blessed by someone's grandmother. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Vivian spoke again. "Sarah warned you about Daniel." It wasn't a question. Caleb set down his fork. "How did you know?" "Because Sarah's been warning people about Daniel for 3 years. She thinks he's too ambitious, too willing to sacrifice ethics for growth, too influential over my decisions." "Is she right?" "About which part?" "Any of it." Vivian took a long drink of her water. "Daniel and I have a complicated history. We dated briefly when we first started the company. It ended badly. We stayed business partners because we're both pragmatic enough to know that personal feelings don't matter compared to building something that lasts. That doesn't answer my question. No, it doesn't. She met his eyes. Daniel is brilliant and driven and sometimes makes decisions I don't agree with. But he's also the reason this company exists. When we had 6 employees and no revenue and everyone said we'd fail, he worked 20-hour days to prove them wrong. He's earned my loyalty. Even if he's the one destroying everything you built, he's not. You sound very sure. I am sure. But something in her voice wavered, just for a second, just enough. Daniel would burn himself down before letting this company fail. Whatever's happening, he's not behind it. Caleb didn't argue. Instead, he changed subjects. Tell me about your relationship with your other executives. They spent the next 2 hours talking through company politics and personal dynamics and all the messy human elements that didn't show up in security logs. Vivian was surprisingly candid, describing bitter rivalries and quiet alliances and the 1,000 small tensions that built up in any organization running on ambition and pressure. Marcus thinks I should go public, she said, halfway through her second beer. Take the company to an IPO, cash out. Let Wall Street dictate our future. Jennifer agrees with him. Sarah thinks it would destroy everything we stand for. Thomas doesn't care either way as long as his department gets funded. And Daniel? Daniel what? Daniel used to think we should stay private, keep control, build slowly. But lately he's been pushing for aggressive expansion, new offices, new service lines, acquisitions. She stared into her beer. Sometimes I wonder if he's right, if I'm holding us back by being too cautious. You don't strike me as cautious. You'd be surprised. She looked up at him. After Rachel died, you chose safety. I get that. I made the opposite choice. I threw myself into risk and growth and pushing harder. But maybe we're both just running from the same thing. The observation hit too close to home. Caleb shifted in his seat. Which is? The fear that if we stop moving, we'll have to actually feel everything we've been avoiding. They finished their beers in silence after that, the weight of unspoken things settling between them like snow. When they finally left the restaurant, the city was dark and cold and somehow more honest than it seemed in daylight. Thank you for coming here, Vivian said as they stood on the sidewalk. I know I strong-armed you into it, but thank you. Ask me again in a month if I still think it was a good idea. Deal. She pulled her coat tighter against the wind. Get some sleep, Caleb. Tomorrow, we start for real. She walked away before he could respond, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians like she'd never been there at all. Caleb stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, watching the city move around him, and wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of interviews, data analysis, and slowly building a picture of how Laurent's security actually functioned beneath its polished exterior. Caleb set up shop in an empty office on the 44th floor, surrounded by whiteboards covered in diagrams and timelines, and the kind of obsessive detail that his old therapist would have called concerning. He interviewed every member of the leadership team multiple times. Daniel was polished and professional, and gave answers that revealed absolutely nothing. Sarah was direct and occasionally blunt, offering theories about corporate culture that might have been helpful if they'd included actual evidence. Marcus talked about financial pressures. Jennifer described client relationships. Thomas explained operational procedures in mind-numbing detail. None of them trusted him. All of them resented his presence. And every single one of them had something to hide, though Caleb couldn't yet tell which secrets were relevant and which were just the normal debris of working adults with complicated lives. He also started analyzing the security logs, searching for patterns in access times and system queries, and all the digital breadcrumbs people left without realizing it. The work was tedious and occasionally numbing, but it felt good to use this part of his brain again, to see connections and anomalies and possibilities. At home, Emma was finding her rhythm. The photography club turned into actual friends, or at least people she had lunch with, which counted as progress. She complained less about her homework and more about specific teachers, which suggested she was actually engaged. Some nights she'd show Caleb photos she'd taken, urban landscapes and candid street portraits that showed real talent. And Vivian was everywhere, in meetings, checking his progress, over lunch, answering questions. Late at night, texting random thoughts about the investigation. She was intense and demanding and occasionally exhausting, but working with her felt like being 22 again, back when they were both convinced they could solve any problem if they just tried hard enough. "You're spending a lot of time with her," Emma observed one evening, catching Caleb texting Vivian about a discrepancy in the October logs. "It's work." "Uh-huh. What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing." Emma returned to her chemistry homework, but she was smiling in a way that suggested she knew something he didn't. On the 23rd day of his investigation, Caleb found his first real lead. It was buried in access logs from August, a pattern so subtle he'd missed it twice before his brain finally registered the anomaly. Someone had been accessing client files at 3 in the morning, using legitimate credentials but following a pattern that made no sense for normal work. He pulled up the user account. Jackson Miller, a junior security engineer who'd been with the company for 18 months. According to his file, Jackson was 26, Stanford graduate, lived in Brooklyn, and had gotten consistent positive reviews. Caleb dug deeper. Jackson's access pattern showed he was working odd hours, but that wasn't unusual in tech. What was unusual was the specific files he accessed, all clients who'd later experienced breaches, all accessed weeks before the incidents occurred. He was building a case file when his office door opened. Vivian entered without knocking, carrying 2 coffees and wearing the expression of someone who'd been in meetings for 8 straight hours. "Please tell me you have good news," she said, handing him one of the coffees. "I just spent 2 hours explaining to our board why our stock price is down 42% and our client retention rate is in the toilet. Maybe." He turned his laptop toward her. "Look at these access patterns." She studied the screen, her expression sharpening. "Jackson Miller. You know him?" "I know everyone who works here." She scrolled through the data. "Jackson's good, quiet, keeps to himself, but technically solid. You think he's involved?" "I think his access pattern matches every breach we've had. I think he's accessing files he has no business touching. And I think we need to bring him in for questioning." Vivian's jaw tightened. "Questioning or interrogation?" "Conversation, low pressure, see how he reacts. And if he lawyers up, then we know we're onto something." She nodded slowly. "Set it up. But Caleb, if you're wrong about this, it could destroy that kid's career. Make sure you're not just seeing patterns because you want to find answers." "I'm sure." He wasn't entirely, but he was sure enough. They brought Jackson Miller in the next morning, framing it as a routine follow-up interview about security procedures. The kid showed up wearing a hoodie and sneakers, looking nervous but not guilty. Caleb and Vivian met him in a small conference room that felt deliberately intimate. "Am I in trouble?" Jackson asked, sitting down with the hunched posture of someone who'd spent too many hours at a keyboard. "No," Vivian said gently. "We're just trying to understand some access patterns we've noticed. Nothing to worry about." Caleb pulled up the logs on his laptop. "Jackson, can you walk me through your typical workflow? What files you access, when you access them, that kind of thing." Sure." Jackson scratched his neck. "I usually get in around 9, check my queue of security tickets, handle whatever's urgent. Sometimes I work late if we've got a client issue or a deadline." "And you have access to client files?" "Yeah, for troubleshooting. If there's a security concern with a specific client, I need to review their setup." "Makes sense." Caleb turned the laptop toward him. "Can you explain why you access these specific files?" He pointed to the August logs. "They weren't assigned to you, and there were no open tickets related to them." Jackson's face went pale. I was doing research." "Research on what?" "Just learning how different client setups work, trying to improve my skills." "At 3 in the morning? I have insomnia. Sometimes I work when I can't sleep." It was plausible, almost plausible enough. Caleb leaned forward. "Jackson, I'm going to be direct with you. These files you accessed, every single one of them was later involved in a security breach. That's not a coincidence I can ignore." "I didn't breach anything." Jackson's voice cracked. "I swear. I was just reading documentation, trying to understand our systems better. That's all." "Then help me understand," Vivian said, her voice still gentle. "Because from where we're sitting, this looks really bad." Jackson's hands were shaking now. He looked young and terrified and like he was about to either confess or have a panic attack. "Someone told me to do it," he whispered. The room went very still. "Who?" Caleb asked. I don't know. I got an email from what I thought was internal security, asking me to audit certain client files and report back on vulnerabilities. I thought it was a legitimate assignment. Do you still have the email? No, it said to delete it for security reasons. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Caleb and Vivian exchanged glances. It fit the profile of social engineering, manipulating an employee into compromising security without them realizing what they were doing. Jackson, Vivian said carefully, I need you to tell me everything. Every email, every instruction, every piece of information you shared. Can you do that? He nodded, tears starting to form. Am I going to jail? Not if you cooperate fully and tell us the truth. They spent the next 2 hours extracting every detail Jackson could remember. The emails had come sporadically over 3 months, always from addresses that looked internal, but that Jackson couldn't quite remember. The instructions had been specific. Access certain files, document certain vulnerabilities, reply with findings to an encrypted channel that disappeared after each message. I thought I was helping, Jackson kept saying. I thought I was doing my job. By the time they finished, Caleb had a clearer picture. Jackson was a tool, not the mastermind. Someone had identified him as vulnerable, young, eager to prove himself, working odd hours when fewer people were around, and exploited that perfectly. The question was, who? Thank you for your honesty, Vivian said as they wrapped up. You're suspended with pay while we investigate further. Don't discuss this with anyone. Understood? Jackson nodded miserably and left, looking like a man walking to his execution. Alone in the conference room, Caleb turned to Vivian. He's telling the truth. I know. Which means someone inside your company is manipulating employees to create breaches that look external. I know that too. She rubbed her temples. The question is who has the technical knowledge to set up encrypted channels, the access to create fake internal emails, and the detailed understanding of our client relationships to know which files to target. Caleb had already run through the possibilities in his head. The list was short and disturbing. Your leadership team, he said quietly. It has to be someone in your inner circle. Vivian's expression went hard. Then we find out who, before they destroy everything we've built. The investigation shifted after Jackson Miller's confession, becoming something darker and more personal than Caleb had anticipated. He spent the next week buried in technical logs and encrypted communications, trying to trace the fake internal emails Jackson had received. The trail was clean, professionally clean, which told him everything he needed to know about who he was dealing with. Whoever had manipulated Jackson wasn't some amateur hacker or disgruntled employee acting on impulse. This was someone with intimate knowledge of Laurent Security's infrastructure, someone who understood both the technical systems and the human vulnerabilities well enough to exploit them perfectly. Someone who'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Caleb sat in his office at 2 a.m, staring at access logs until his eyes burned, when his phone buzzed. Vivian's name lit up the screen. You're still awake, he said, answering. So are you. Her voice sounded rough, like she'd been talking for hours. I'm on the 45th floor. Can you come up? Yes. He found her in the executive suite, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan. The city sprawled below them, a galaxy of lights that never quite went dark. She'd kicked off her heels and was holding a glass of something amber that was probably expensive. Whiskey? She offered, gesturing to the bottle on her desk. Why not? She poured him 2 fingers in a crystal tumbler that felt absurdly heavy. They stood together at the window, drinking in silence, and for a moment Caleb could pretend they were just 2 old friends catching up instead of 2 people watching an empire crumble. I talked to the board today, Vivian said finally. They're giving me 60 days to fix this. After that, they're voting on my removal as CEO. Can they do that? I own 48% of the company. They own the rest. If enough of them vote together, yes, they can absolutely do that. She took a long drink. Daniel's been talking to them, laying groundwork, making the case that my leadership has become a liability. You sound certain. I am certain. Marcus told me. He thought I should know. She laughed bitterly. At least someone on my leadership team still has the decency to stab me in the front instead of the back. Caleb studied her reflection in the window. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Exhausted in her bones, in her soul, in the part of her that had been holding this company together through sheer force of will. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" he asked. "I don't remember." "When's the last time you took a day off?" He shouted, "Also don't remember." She turned to face him. "This company is everything I've built, Caleb. It's 8 years of 90-hour weeks and sacrificed relationships and choosing work over literally everything else. If I lose it, I lose the only thing that makes me matter." That's not true, isn't it? Her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears or might have been fury. "I'm 30 years old. I have no family except parents who see me as a tax write-off and publicity opportunity. I haven't been in a serious relationship since Daniel, and that ended because I chose a client meeting over his father's funeral. I have exactly 3 friends, and 2 of them are on my payroll. So tell me, Caleb, if this company disappears, what exactly do I have left?" The question hung in the air between them, raw and honest, in a way that made Caleb's chest ache. He recognized the shape of it, the fear that if you stripped away the things you'd built to define yourself, there'd be nothing underneath except emptiness. "You have people who care about you," he said quietly. "Name one who isn't financially dependent on me." "Me." She laughed, but it sounded broken. "You're here because I'm paying you $5 million. I'm here because you asked for help, and I couldn't say no. The money's just a justification I gave myself to make it feel less terrifying." He set down his glass. "You're not alone, Vivian, even if it feels like it." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with whiskey and exhaustion. "Do you ever wish we'd stayed in touch?" she asked. "After I left for boarding school?" "Sometimes. I tried, you know. I wrote you letters, called a few times, but you were already moving on. New friends, high school, your whole life happening without me." She looked away. "Eventually, I stopped trying. Figured you were better off without the weird rich girl who couldn't understand why normal people didn't have private jets." "I didn't move on because I wanted to. I moved on because staying stuck on someone who'd left felt like torture." The admission surprised him. "You were my best friend. Then you were just gone." "I was 12. I didn't know how to process that. And now? Now we're adults with matching insomnia and terrible coping mechanisms, standing in your office at 2 in the morning drinking expensive whiskey." He picked up his glass again. "Could be worse." She smiled, actually smiled, for the first time since he'd arrived. "Could be better too." They finished their drinks and returned to the subject they'd been circling around. The investigation. The betrayal. The ticking clock counting down to Vivian's removal. "I've been thinking about the pattern," Caleb said, pulling up his laptop. "The breaches are too precise. Whoever's doing this isn't just leaking data. They're strategically destroying your most valuable client relationships while making it look like system failures. Which requires knowing which clients matter most. And knowing when to strike for maximum damage." He showed her a timeline he'd built. "Look at the spacing, 3 weeks between each breach. Just enough time for one crisis to stabilize before the next one hits. Never long enough for you to fully recover." Vivian studied the screen, her analytical mind already working through implications. So they're not trying to destroy the company in one catastrophic event. They're bleeding it slowly. Which suggests the goal isn't pure destruction, it's something else. Like what? "I don't know yet, but I think we're asking the wrong question." He pulled up the employee files again. "We've been focused on who has the technical ability to pull this off. But technical ability is table stakes at a company like this. Half your employees could manipulate Jackson Miller if they wanted to. So what's the right question? Who benefits from bleeding your company slowly instead of killing it quickly?" The question seemed to hit Vivian like a physical blow. She sat down heavily in her desk chair, staring at nothing. "Someone who wants control," she said slowly. "Someone who wants me removed but wants the company to survive so they can take over." "That's my theory." "Daniel," she said the name like it hurt. "Daniel's been positioning himself as my successor for 2 years. He's made relationships with the board, built alliances with key clients, established himself as the steady hand while I'm the visionary who's lost touch with reality. Would he do this? 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. Now? She closed her eyes. I don't know what anyone's capable of anymore. Caleb pulled up Daniel's file again, studying the timeline of his involvement with the company. 8 years of dedication, countless late nights, and sacrificed weekends. A failed romantic relationship with Vivian that somehow hadn't destroyed their professional partnership. Tell me about when you two dated, Caleb said. Why does that matter? Because understanding their personal relationships helps me understand their motivations. Vivian was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her empty glass. It was 5 years ago, when the company was still small. We were working insane hours, basically living in the office. One night we kissed, and it felt like the natural progression of everything we'd built together. She paused. For about 3 months it was good. Great even. Then his father got sick, terminal cancer. Daniel wanted to take time off, be with his family. I said we couldn't afford it. We had a major client presentation that would make or break the company. The funeral you mentioned. He asked me to come, said it was important. I chose the presentation instead. Her voice went flat. We landed the client, made $2 million. Daniel came back a week later and ended things. Said he couldn't be with someone who'd choose money over humanity. But you stayed business partners. Because we're both pragmatic enough to know that personal feelings don't pay the bills or keep 300 employees employed. She looked up at him. You think I'm a monster? Well, I think you're someone who's spent so long prioritizing work that you forgot how to prioritize anything else. He said it gently, without judgment. I did the same thing in reverse. After Rachel died, I made Emma my entire world and forgot I was allowed to want things for myself. And now, now I'm trying to figure out if I can want both. Work that matters and a life that doesn't revolve around fear. He closed his laptop. You asked if I ever wish we'd stayed in touch. Yeah, I do. Because maybe if we had, we could have reminded each other that ambition and safety aren't the only things worth building your life around. Vivian stood and moved back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. If Daniel's behind this, I have to fire him, probably prosecute him, and that will destroy any remaining trust the board has in my judgment. If Daniel's behind this, he's been destroying that trust intentionally for months. I know. She pressed her forehead against the window. I just keep thinking about everything we built together. All those nights when it was just us against the world, convinced we were going to change everything. How does that person become someone who'd betray me like this? People change. Or maybe they were always capable of it, and you just didn't want to see it. She turned around. I need proof, Caleb. Not theories or timelines or suspicious access patterns. I need something concrete enough that even the board can't deny it. I'm working on it. Work faster. It wasn't cruel, just desperate. Because in 60 days, none of this matters anyway. Emma was still awake when Caleb got home at 3:30, sitting on the couch with her laptop open and headphones in. She pulled them off when he entered. You look terrible, she observed. Thanks. Seriously, Dad, when's the last time you actually slept? When's the last time you went to bed before midnight on a school night? Touché. She closed her laptop. I made coffee earlier. It's probably still warm. He poured himself a cup from the pot she'd left on, touched by the gesture even though the coffee was lukewarm and bitter. Emma joined him in the kitchen, hopping up to sit on the counter in a way that would have driven Rachel crazy. How's the investigation going, she asked. It's going. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. He leaned against the counter next to her. How's school? Also going. She smiled slightly. We had a photography assignment today. Document something that represents change. I took pictures of the construction site across from school. All these old buildings getting torn down to build something new. That's good, metaphorical. Miss Peterson said it was derivative and obvious. Emma shrugged. But Sarah, that's my friend from photography club, said it was honest, which I think is better than clever. You have a friend named Sarah. I have several friends now, actually. Sarah, Marcus, and Jennifer. Before you ask, yes, I'm aware they have the same names as people at Vivian's company. It's a weird coincidence. Caleb smiled despite his exhaustion. Hearing Emma talk about friends, actual friends, people she ate lunch with and texted and seemed to genuinely like, made everything else feel slightly less overwhelming. I'm glad you're making friends. Don't get too excited, we're all weird. She took his coffee and sipped it, making a face at the bitterness. Sarah's obsessed with film photography and develops her own prints in her bathroom. Marcus is writing a fantasy novel that's already like 300,000 words. Jennifer wants to be a documentary filmmaker and carries a camera everywhere. Sounds like you found your people. Maybe. She handed back the coffee. They asked if I wanted to hang out this weekend, go to some art exhibit in Brooklyn. You should go, even though I've only known them for like 3 weeks. Especially because you've only known them for 3 weeks. That's how friendships work. You spend time together and see if you actually like each other. Emma was quiet for a moment, swinging her legs against the cabinet. Do you like Vivian? The question caught him off guard. She's my boss. That's not what I asked. What are you really asking, Em? I'm asking if you like her the way you liked Mom. Emma's voice stayed casual, but her eyes were sharp. Because I see how you look at your phone when she texts, and how you stay late at the office even though you could probably do most of your work from home, and how you came home at 3:30 in the morning looking like you've been having important conversations instead of just analyzing data. Caleb set down his coffee, buying time to figure out how to answer. It's complicated. That's such a dad answer. It's the truth. Vivian and I have history. We were best friends when we were kids. Now she's this brilliant, intense person who's watching everything she built fall apart, and she asked me to help save it. That creates a lot of complicated feelings. But do you like her? I don't know. He met his daughter's eyes. Is that honest enough? Emma considered this. Yeah, actually, that's pretty honest. She hopped down from the counter. For what it's worth, I think she likes you. She calls you Caleb instead of Mr. Hayes, which means something. And when she came to dinner last week, she asked me about my photography like she actually cared about the answer. When did you get so observant? I've always been observant. You just stopped noticing because you were too busy making sure I was okay. She headed toward her room, then paused. I am okay, by the way. Better than okay. So if you want to like someone again, you don't have to feel guilty about it. She disappeared into her bedroom before he could respond, leaving Caleb alone with his lukewarm coffee and the uncomfortable realization that his 14-year-old daughter understood him better than he understood himself. The breakthrough came 3 days later, hidden in email metadata that Caleb had reviewed a dozen times without seeing the pattern. He was working late again, had been working late every night that week, when it finally clicked. The fake internal emails Jackson had received weren't sent from compromised accounts. They were sent from accounts that had been created specifically for this purpose, using server access that required administrator privileges. And administrator privileges at Laurent Security were limited to exactly 5 people: Vivian, Daniel, Sarah, Thomas, and one senior IT administrator named Robert Chen, who had zero motive and an airtight alibi for every breach, which meant the emails had come from someone in leadership. Caleb pulled up the creation timestamps for the fake accounts. They'd been established over 6 months, always during off hours, always from the New York office. He cross-referenced them with building access logs, looking for patterns in who was in the building when each account was created. Daniel Kwan's access card appeared at every single timestamp. Caleb stared at the screen, feeling his stomach drop. It wasn't conclusive. Other people had been in the building during some of those times, but it was the strongest pattern he'd found yet. Daniel had been in the office, with the necessary access, at the exact moments the infrastructure for the breaches was being built. He needed more. One more piece of evidence that would transform correlation into causation. He started digging into Daniel's communications, looking for anything suspicious. The man was careful. His emails were professional, his calendar was transparent, His work product was impeccable. But buried in his calendar from 4 months ago, Caleb found something odd. A recurring 2-hour block every Tuesday afternoon marked simply personal. Caleb pulled up building access logs for those Tuesdays. Daniel's card showed him leaving the building at 2 o'clock and returning at 4:30, every single week, like clockwork. He ran a broader search, looking for any other patterns in Daniel's schedule. And there it was. On the days immediately following those Tuesday absences, significant activity on the fake email accounts. Messages sent to Jackson Miller. Instructions delivered. The machinery of betrayal humming along with mechanical precision. Caleb was building a timeline when someone knocked on his office door. He looked up to find Sarah Chen standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking tired. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering one of the cups. "Thanks." He took it, surprised by the gesture. "What are you doing here so late?" "Could ask you the same thing." She sat down in this chair across from his desk without being invited. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about secrets that matter." "Yeah? I think you're looking at Daniel." She said it calmly, like they were discussing the weather. "And I think you're right to look at him, but you should know what you're getting into." Caleb set down his coffee. "I'm listening." Daniel built this company with Vivian. He gave up opportunities at bigger firms, better pay, easier hours. He believed in what they were creating. Sarah leaned forward. But about a year ago, something changed. He started talking about expansion and growth like they were the only things that mattered. Started pushing Vivian to be more aggressive, take bigger risks, move faster. What changed? Oh, I don't know, but I started noticing things. Late-night meetings with board members, conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms, small comments about Vivian's judgment that felt calculated. She paused. "I told Vivian about it. She said I was being paranoid." "Were you?" "You tell me. You're the investigator." She stood. "But if you're going after Daniel, you need to understand something. He's not some mustache-twirling villain. He's someone who convinced himself that destroying Vivian's credibility was necessary to save the company. And people who believe they're doing the right thing are way more dangerous than people who know they're doing wrong." She left before Caleb could ask follow-up questions, leaving him alone with her warning and his growing certainty that Daniel Kwan was exactly who he'd been looking for. He spent the rest of the night building an airtight case. Access logs, email metadata, calendar patterns, financial transactions he found buried in Daniel's expense reports. By 4 in the morning, he had enough to present to Vivian. By 5 in the morning, he'd found the one piece of evidence that changed everything. It was a document buried in Daniel's personal drive, which Caleb technically shouldn't have been able to access, but had managed to anyway through creative interpretation of his full access authority. The document was titled Transition Plan and dated 6 months earlier. Caleb opened it and felt his blood run cold. It wasn't just a plan to undermine Vivian, it was a comprehensive strategy to force her out and position Daniel as the obvious replacement. Complete with timelines, talking points for board members, and a detailed analysis of which clients to sacrifice to create maximum pressure without destroying the company's long-term value. The breaches weren't random. They were surgical strikes designed to erode confidence in Vivian's leadership while leaving Daniel positioned as the stable alternative who could restore order. At the bottom of the document was a signature line for Daniel and one other person. The second signature was blurred in the digital copy, but the name was still visible. Marcus Webb, Chief Financial Officer. Caleb sat back in his chair, his mind racing. It wasn't just Daniel. It was a coordinated effort between 2 of Vivian's most trusted executives, working together to engineer her removal. He picked up his phone and texted Vivian. "We need to talk. Now. I have what we need." Wait. Her response came within seconds. "My office. 10 minutes, huh? Got it." He gathered his evidence and headed for the elevator, his heart pounding. This was it. The moment that would either save Vivian's company or destroy what little trust she had left in the people around her. When he reached the executive suite, Vivian was already there, standing at her window with the same glass of whiskey she seemed to keep permanently filled. She turned when he entered, and the expression on her face suggested she already knew this wasn't going to be good news. "Tell me," she said. So he did. He walked her through everything: the fake email accounts, the access patterns, the Tuesday absences, the expense reports, and finally the transition plan he'd found. He watched her face stay carefully neutral through most of it, professional armor firmly in place, until he got to the part about Marcus being involved. That's when something in her broke. "Marcus, too," she said quietly. "Not just Daniel, both of them." "I'm sorry." Don't apologize." Her voice went hard. "You did exactly what I hired you to do. Found the truth, no matter how much it hurts." She moved to her desk and pulled up something on her computer, typing with violent precision. After a moment, she turned the screen toward him. It was a calendar invite for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, marked emergency board meeting. "You're moving on this immediately," Caleb said. "I have 60 days until they vote me out. I'm not giving them one more day to prepare." She sent the invite, then pulled up her phone. "I'm calling my lawyer and head of security, and probably a crisis PR firm because this is going to be a nightmare. Vivian, they were my partners, Caleb, the people I trusted more than anyone else in this entire company. And they spent 6 months systematically destroying everything we built together because they decided I wasn't fit to lead anymore." Her hands were shaking. "Do you have any idea how that feels?" "No, but I know what betrayal feels like." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "I know you do. I'm sorry. This isn't your trauma to manage. We're in this together," he said. "That was the deal. The deal was you investigate, and I pay you $5 million. The deal changed." He moved closer. "You asked me here because you needed someone you could trust. So trust me now. We'll get through tomorrow. We'll get through whatever comes after. But you don't have to do it alone." Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive, and picked up her phone to start making the calls that would change everything. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 the next morning, but Caleb arrived at 7 to prepare. Vivian was already there, looking like she hadn't slept, which she probably hadn't, and wearing a suit that looked like armor. Her lawyer sat next to her, a severe woman named Patricia Kim, who specialized in corporate warfare. Head of security was running final checks on the conference room where the meeting would take place. "Ready?" Patricia asked Vivian. "No, but we're doing it anyway." The board members arrived at 8:45, looking confused and annoyed at being summoned on 12 hours' notice. Daniel and Marcus arrived at 8:50, together, which told Caleb they'd already coordinated their strategy for whatever they thought this meeting was about. At 9 o'clock exactly, Vivian called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began, her voice steady and professional. "I've called you here because I've uncovered evidence of a conspiracy to undermine this company and force my removal as CEO." The room erupted in overlapping voices, confusion and anger mixing together. Daniel's face went carefully blank, the expression of someone who'd been caught but hadn't admitted it yet. "That's a serious accusation," Board Chair Helen Martinez said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I assume you have evidence?" "Extensive evidence." Vivian nodded to Caleb. "Mr. Hayes has been conducting an independent investigation into the security breaches that have plagued this company. What he found goes far beyond simple security failures." Ian. Caleb stood and began presenting his findings, walking the board through the timeline of fake email accounts, manipulated employees, and strategic breaches designed to erode confidence in Vivian's leadership. He showed them the access logs that pointed to Daniel, the expense reports that connected Marcus, and finally, the transition plan that laid out their entire strategy in black and white. By the time he finished, the room was silent. "This is ridiculous," Daniel said finally. "These are circumstantial patterns being interpreted by someone with no understanding of how this company actually works." "The transition plan has your digital signature on it," Patricia said calmly, "as does Marcus's. That's not circumstantial. Anyone could have created that document and forged our signatures." Could they also have forged your building access records? Your email metadata? The calendar blocks that align perfectly with every piece of infrastructure used to execute these breaches?" Caleb met Daniel's eyes. "You were careful, but you weren't perfect." Marcus had gone pale, his CFO brain probably already calculating the legal and financial implications of being caught. "I want to speak with my lawyer." "That's your right," Vivian said. "But before you do, I want you both to understand something. This company, the one you claim to have been trying to save, employs 347 people who trusted you, who believed we were all working toward the same goal. And you weaponized that trust to serve your own ambitions. It wasn't about ambition, Daniel said, and for the first time his control slipped. It was about saving this company from your reckless leadership. You're brilliant, Vivian, but you're also stubborn and blind to your own weaknesses. The board was already losing confidence in you. I just accelerated an inevitable conclusion. By destroying client relationships and ruining people's careers? By creating the conditions for someone more qualified to take over before your decisions destroyed everything we built. He stood. I don't regret what I did. I regret that it came to this. Helen Martinez cleared her throat. Mr. Kwan, Mr. Webb, you're both terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. We'll be pursuing all available legal remedies for your actions. Bus. The meeting continued for another hour, dealing with crisis management and damage control and all the practical implications of losing two senior executives in one morning. Through it all, Vivian remained calm and professional, answering questions and making decisions like she hadn't just watched two of her oldest colleagues get escorted out by security. But when the board members finally left, and it was just Vivian, Caleb, and Patricia remaining in the conference room, Vivian's armor finally cracked. She sat down heavily, put her head in her hands, and let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. I did it, she said. We did it. You did it, Caleb corrected. I just found the evidence. You had the courage to act on it. Well, courage or desperation. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. She looked up at him, and her eyes were red but clear. Thank you for finding the truth even though it was terrible. For being someone I could trust when trust felt impossible. That's what friends do. Is that what we are? Friends? Caleb thought about the question. About 20 years of separation and 3 months of intensive collaboration and all the complicated feelings that lived between those points. Yes, he said. I think we are. Vivian smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since he'd shown her the evidence against Daniel and Marcus. Good, because I'm going to need friends to get through whatever comes next. What came next turned out to be complicated. The board launched a formal investigation into the breaches. Federal prosecutors got involved. Several clients who'd terminated their contracts quietly reached out to discuss reinstating them now that the security issues had been addressed. The stock price stabilized, then started climbing. And somewhere in the chaos of rebuilding and recovering and learning to trust again, Vivian's company started becoming something healthier than what it had been. Something less obsessed with growth for growth's sake and more focused on sustainable excellence. Caleb watched it happen from his office on the 44th floor, still investigating and analyzing and helping build better security systems. But increasingly, his role shifted from investigator to advisor, from outsider to integral part of the team Vivian was rebuilding. Emma thrived in ways that made his chest ache with gratitude. She won a photography award for her Change series, made a group of friends who actually seemed to appreciate her weirdness instead of tolerating it, started talking about colleges and futures with something that looked like hope. And late at night, when the office was empty and the city glowed below them, Caleb and Vivian would meet in her office and talk about the company, about their lives, about the distance they'd traveled from being weird kids in Boston to being complicated adults trying to build something that mattered. They didn't call it anything, didn't label it or define it or try to force it into shapes that felt false. They just existed together in the spaces between professional and personal, past and present, safety and risk. And slowly, carefully, Caleb started to believe that maybe wanting things, wanting connection and challenge and a life bigger than fear, didn't have to end in loss. Maybe it could end in something else entirely. 3 months after Daniel and Marcus were escorted from the building, Caleb found himself officially titled Chief Security Officer of Laurent Security Solutions. The announcement came during a company-wide meeting where Vivian stood in front of 347 employees and explained that the investigation was closed, the threats neutralized, and the future brighter than it had been in a year. Some of you know Caleb Hayes as the investigator who saved this company, Vivian said, her voice carrying across the auditorium they'd rented for the occasion. I know him as the person who chose to trust me when trust was the hardest thing to give. Going forward, he'll be leading our security infrastructure and making sure we never face this kind of threat again. The applause was genuine but uncertain. Caleb could see it in their faces. These people had watched two of their senior leaders get fired for sabotage. They'd lived through months of chaos and uncertainty. They weren't ready to trust anyone completely, and he didn't blame them. After the meeting, Sarah Chen cornered him in the hallway outside the auditorium. "CSO," she said, arms crossed. "That's a hell of a promotion for someone who's been here less than 6 months." Vivian offered. I accepted. "And the $5 million she originally promised you?" "Still getting paid. Turns out I earned it." He met her eyes. "You have a problem with me being CSO. Say it directly." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then her expression softened slightly. "I don't have a problem with you. I have a problem with this company's tendency to make impulsive decisions during crisis. But you did good work finding Daniel and Marcus. Just don't let Vivian's trust make you blind the way it made her blind." "I'll keep that in mind." "Do that." She started to walk away, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. The company needs people who haven't been here long enough to develop bad habits." The next few weeks were a blur of hiring replacements for Daniel and Marcus, restructuring departments, and implementing new security protocols that actually made sense instead of just looking impressive on paper. Caleb found himself in meetings about budgets and personnel and strategic planning, all the corporate machinery he'd avoided for years. It was exhausting and occasionally mind-numbing, but it was also oddly satisfying. He was building something, creating systems that would protect people and prevent the kind of betrayal that had nearly destroyed everything. Emma noticed the change in him. She mentioned it one Saturday morning when they were having breakfast together, a rare occurrence now that Caleb's schedule had exploded into 70-hour weeks. "You seem different," she said, spreading cream cheese on a bagel with the precision of someone who'd perfected the technique. "Less stressed. I'm working twice as many hours as I did in Vermont." "Yeah, but in Vermont you were stressed about being bored. Now you're stressed about having too much to do." "That's a better kind of stress." "When did you become so wise?" I've always been wise. You're just finally noticing." She took a bite of bagel. "Speaking of noticing things, are you and Vivian dating?" Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. "What?" He said, "It's a simple question. Are you dating Vivian Laurent, your boss and childhood friend who looks at you like you personally hung the moon?" "She doesn't look at me like that." "Dad, come on. I've seen you two together. The way you finish each other's sentences. The way she calls you at weird hours just to talk through problems. The way you smile at your phone when she texts." Emma set down her bagel. "If you're not dating, you should be. It's complicated." "Everything's complicated. That's not an excuse." She's my boss." "So quit. You've got $5 million and a resume that's now insane. You could work anywhere. It's not that simple. Why not?" Caleb set down his coffee mug, trying to figure out how to explain something he barely understood himself. "Because I spent 4 years after your mom died building a life so small and controlled that nothing could hurt me. And being here, working with Vivian, feeling things again, it's terrifying. What if I screw it up? What if I'm not ready? What if you spend the rest of your life asking, 'What if?' instead of just trying?" Emma interrupted. "Mom died, Dad. That was horrible and unfair, and it broke both of us. But she's been gone 4 years. At some point, you have to stop using her death as a reason to not live your own life." The words hit like a physical blow. Caleb opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, to explain that it wasn't that simple. But Emma's eyes were steady and knowing and uncomfortably accurate. "When did you get so smart?" he asked quietly. "Probably around the same time you stopped noticing I wasn't a kid anymore." She stood and carried her plate to the sink. "I'm meeting Sarah and Marcus at the park to work on our photography project. I'll be back by 6. She left before he could respond, leaving Caleb alone with his coffee and the uncomfortable truth his 14-year-old daughter had just delivered. That evening, Vivian called asking if he wanted to grab dinner. They'd fallen into the habit over the past month, meeting after work to debrief and talk and occasionally just exist in each other's company without the weight of corporate crisis hanging over them. They met at a small Italian place in the West Village that Vivian claimed made the best carbonara in Manhattan. The restaurant was cramped and loud and full of couples on dates, which made Caleb hyper-aware of how this might look to outside observers. "You're quiet tonight," Vivian observed, twirling pasta on her fork. "Bad day?" Emma asked if we're dating. Vivian's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What did you tell her?" "That it's complicated." "Is it? Isn't it?" Caleb set down his own fork. "You're my boss. We have a professional relationship that's critical to the company. Getting involved romantically would create conflicts of interest and potential HR nightmares, and those are all excuses," Vivian interrupted. "Good excuses. Logical excuses, but still excuses." "Then what's the real reason?" "Bess?" She was quiet for a moment, studying her wine glass like it held answers. "I think we're both terrified. I spent 8 years building a company and losing everyone who mattered along the way. You spent 4 years hiding from anything that might hurt you. And now we're sitting here pretending this is just dinner between friends, when we both know it stopped being that weeks ago. So what do we do about it?" "What's?" "Jean, I don't know." She looked up at him. "But I know I don't want to spend another 20 years wondering what might have happened if we'd been brave enough to try." They finished dinner in charged silence, the conversation hanging between them like a question neither was quite ready to answer. When they left the restaurant, Vivian's hand brushed against his, and Caleb found himself taking it without thinking. They walked through the West Village holding hands like teenagers, not talking, just being together. "This is a terrible idea," Caleb said finally. "Probably. You're my boss. You could quit." Emma said the same thing. Your daughter's smart." Vivian stopped walking, turning to face him on a street corner while taxis rushed past and the city hummed around them. "I'm not good at this, Caleb. Relationships, vulnerability, choosing people over work. I failed at it with Daniel and with everyone else who tried to matter to me. I'm not good at it either. I chose safety over everything for 4 years. Built walls so high I forgot what it felt like to want something beyond survival. So we're both disasters." "Pretty much." She smiled, and it transformed her face into something younger and more hopeful. "Want to be disasters together?" Instead of answering with words, Caleb kissed her, right there on the street corner with 100 strangers walking past, and car horns blaring, and the whole messy chaos of New York surrounding them. She kissed him back like she'd been waiting for this since the night she showed up at his farmhouse in a blizzard. When they finally pulled apart, Vivian was laughing. "What's funny?" Caleb asked. "I just realized I have no idea how to date someone. I haven't done this since I was 25, and even then I was terrible at it. We'll figure it out together." That's very optimistic for someone who spent 4 years convinced happiness was a trap. "Maybe I'm learning." They walked back to Vivian's apartment. She lived in a penthouse in Tribeca that made Caleb's place look like a closet, and spent the rest of the night talking about Rachel and the grief that never quite disappeared but gradually became something you could live with. About Vivian's parents and their complete inability to see her as anything beyond a business asset. About Emma and her photography and the small miracle of watching her thrive in an environment that actually challenged her. "I'm scared," Vivian admitted around 2 in the morning when they were sitting on her couch with the city sprawled below them. "I'm scared I'll choose work over you the same way I chose work over everyone else. That I'll wake up one day and realize I destroyed another relationship because I can't stop being who I am." "Oh, sorry." Who you are is someone who cares intensely about the things she builds and the people who depend on her. That's not a flaw. Caleb took her hand. "But maybe we both need to learn that caring about work and caring about people aren't mutually exclusive." Is that what you learned? In Vermont? "I learned that choosing safety over everything else is just another way of being reckless. Just slower." He squeezed her hand. "And I learned that Emma was right. At some point you have to stop asking what if and start trying." Vivian leaned against him, and they sat there in comfortable silence while the city lights flickered like promises neither of them was quite ready to believe yet. The next morning, Caleb woke up on Vivian's couch with a blanket thrown over him and a note on the coffee table. Had to leave early for board meeting. Coffee's in the kitchen. Don't overthink last night. V. He smiled at the note, pocketed it, and headed home to change before work. Emma was already awake, eating cereal and scrolling through her phone. So, she said without looking up, how was dinner? Good. Just good? Emma, shit. Fine, I won't pry. She looked up, grinning. But you're smiling at your phone like an idiot, so I'm going to assume it went well. When did you become such a troublemaker? I learned from the best. Shorty. Autumn. At the office, word had somehow already spread that Caleb and Vivian were together. He wasn't sure how. They'd been careful, professional, hadn't done anything that would qualify as inappropriate in a workplace. But the looks he got from employees as he walked to his office suggested that corporate gossip traveled faster than light. Sarah appeared in his doorway 10 minutes after he arrived. So, she said, you and Vivian. News travels fast. Hey. Someone saw you holding hands in the West Village, took a photo, and made the rounds on Slack before being deleted by IT. She leaned against the doorframe. For what it's worth, I think it's good for her. She's been alone too long. I'm not sure I'm good for anyone. That's the grief talking. Ignore it. Sarah straightened. But seriously, Caleb, she's been hurt before. Badly. If you're not all in, walk away now before it gets messy. I'm all in. Good. Because she deserves someone who won't leave when things get hard. The complications Sarah had warned about started surfacing within days. Employees who'd been neutral toward Caleb suddenly questioned every decision he made, wondering if he'd earned his position through merit or through his relationship with the CEO. Board members started asking uncomfortable questions about conflicts of interest. A competitor leaked a story to the press about Laurent Security's romantic entanglements affecting corporate governance. Vivian handled it with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to everything else. She called a company-wide meeting and addressed it directly. I'm aware there's been speculation about my personal life, she said, standing in the same auditorium where she'd announced Caleb's promotion. So let's clear it up. Yes, Caleb Hayes and I are in a relationship. No, it didn't influence his hiring or promotion. His position is based entirely on merit and the fact that he saved this company when no one else could. If anyone has concerns about conflicts of interest, my door is open. But I won't tolerate gossip or innuendo undermining people who've earned their place here. The directness worked. The gossip didn't disappear entirely. Corporate environments thrived on drama, but it lost its power to create real damage. What didn't go away was the pressure. Between Caleb's new role, Vivian's board obligations, and the ongoing federal investigation into Daniel and Marcus's sabotage, they were both working impossible hours. Dinners got canceled, weekends disappeared into emergency meetings. The relationship that had felt easy and natural suddenly required scheduling and coordination and conscious effort to maintain. This is insane, Caleb said one Friday night when they'd finally managed to carve out time together, only to both be glued to their laptops responding to separate crises. We work in the same building and I've barely seen you all week. I know. Vivian closed her laptop with a decisive snap. This is exactly what I was afraid of. That I'd fall into the same patterns that destroyed every other relationship I've tried to have. So what do we do? And I don't know. Hire more people? Delegate better? Actually take weekends off like normal humans? She rubbed her temples. Or maybe accept that this is who we are and figure out if we can love each other anyway. I don't want to accept that work has to consume everything. Neither do I. But I also don't know how to be someone who doesn't care intensely about what I build. She looked at him. Do you? Caleb thought about Vermont, about the quiet life he'd built that had felt safe but empty, about the version of himself who'd hidden from ambition and challenge and anything that might hurt. No, he admitted. I don't know how to not care, but maybe there's a middle ground between hiding from life and being consumed by it. Find it and let me know, Vivian said with a tired smile, because I've been looking for 20 years. The middle ground turned out to be harder to find than either of them hoped. They tried setting boundaries, No work talk after 9 p.m., mandatory lunch together twice a week, one full day off per month. But emergencies didn't respect boundaries, and the company was still rebuilding from months of crisis. Emma watched it all with the clear-eyed observation of someone who'd lived through her father's failed attempts at balance before. "You're doing it again," she said one evening when Caleb had canceled plans to attend Emma's photography exhibition because of a security audit that couldn't wait. "Doing what?" "Choosing work over the people who actually matter." She said it without anger, just resignation. "I don't blame you this time. At least you're choosing work that challenges you instead of work that numbs you. But you're still choosing it. Emma, this audit is critical. If we don't—" "I know, it's always critical. That's the problem." She picked up her camera bag. "Sarah's mom is driving us to the exhibition. I'll see you whenever you're done saving the world." She left, and Caleb sat alone in their apartment feeling like he'd failed at the one thing he'd promised himself he wouldn't fail at anymore. He called Vivian. "I screwed up," he said when she answered. "What happened?" "I chose work over Emma. Again, just like I promised myself I wouldn't." "What?" Vivian was quiet for a moment. "Where's the exhibition?" "Chelsea, some gallery the school partnered with." "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. Bring your laptop. We'll finish the audit in the car." "Vivian, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. Because if we can't figure out how to balance this, we're both going to destroy the things that actually matter while convincing ourselves we're doing important work." She paused. 20 minutes. Don't make me wait. Paused. 20 minutes. They finished the audit on Vivian's laptop in the backseat of the car she'd called, working together with the practiced efficiency of people who'd spent months collaborating. By the time they reached the gallery, the report was complete and sent to the board. Emma's photographs were hung in the back section of the gallery, part of a collection from Thornton Academy students. Her Second Chances series had expanded. Now it included not just construction sites, but portraits of people she'd met in the city. An elderly woman feeding pigeons in Central Park, a street musician playing violin in the subway, a father and daughter eating ice cream on a bench. The final photograph in the series was one Caleb hadn't seen before. It was him and Vivian, caught in an unguarded moment outside the office building. They were laughing about something, their faces lit with genuine joy, looking nothing like a CEO and CSO, and everything like two people who'd found each other after being lost for a long time. "When did you take this?" Caleb asked Emma when he found her standing with her friends. "Last Tuesday. You two were leaving for lunch and didn't notice me across the street." She studied the photograph. "I almost didn't include it because it felt too personal. But Ms. Peterson said it was the strongest image in the series. Something about capturing authentic transformation. It's beautiful, Em." "Thanks." She glanced at Vivian, who was studying the other photographs with genuine interest. "I'm glad you came, both of you. I'm sorry I almost missed it." "You didn't miss it. That's what matters." They stayed for the entire exhibition, talking to Emma's teachers and friends, and the other students whose work hung alongside hers. Vivian bought 3 of Emma's photographs, insisting they were investments in an emerging artist. Emma rolled her eyes, but looked pleased. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat while Caleb and Vivian sat in comfortable silence. "I meant what I said earlier," Vivian said quietly, "about needing to figure this out. I don't want to be someone who destroys relationships because I can't stop working. And I don't want to be someone who uses work as an excuse to avoid living." Caleb took her hand. "So maybe we help each other. When I'm choosing work over Emma, you tell me. When you're sacrificing everything for the company, I tell you. We keep each other honest. Think it'll work?" "I think it's better than the alternative." "Which is?" "Ending up alone and successful and wondering why it feels hollow." Vivian squeezed his hand. "Deal." The next few months were an exercise in learning to balance impossible things. Caleb hired a deputy CSO who could handle day-to-day operations, freeing him to focus on strategy instead of constantly fighting fires. Vivian promoted Sarah to COO and actually delegated authority instead of micromanaging everything. They set real boundaries and mostly kept them, learning through trial and error what balance actually meant. It wasn't perfect. Emergencies still happened, boundaries still got violated. But slowly, painfully, they built something that felt sustainable. Emma thrived in ways that made Caleb's chest ache with pride. Her photography series won a regional award. She got early acceptance to 3 prestigious art schools. She started talking about her future with confidence instead of uncertainty. And one evening in late spring, sitting on the couch in their apartment while Emma was out with friends, she asked Caleb a question that made his world tilt. How would you feel if I chose to stay in New York for college instead of going somewhere else? I'd feel like that should be your decision, not mine. That's a very dad answer. She smiled. I'm asking what you want, not what you think I should want. Caleb thought about the farmhouse in Vermont they'd left behind, about the small, safe life he'd built after Rachel died, about the version of himself who'd been convinced that protecting Emma meant keeping her world small. I'd love it if you stayed in New York, he said honestly, but only if it's because this is where you want to be, not because you think I need you here. I want to be here. My friends are here. My school is here. And honestly, Dad, you're happy here in a way you weren't in Vermont. I don't want to be the reason you give that up. You're not giving up anything by choosing your own life. Good, because I'm pretty sure I'm choosing NYU. She grinned. They have an incredible photography program, and it's close enough that I can come home for dinner, but far enough that you and Vivian can have some privacy. When did you become so thoughtful about my love life? Someone has to be. You're both workaholics who'd forget to eat if I didn't remind you. She stood and headed toward her room. Also, Vivian asked me to help her plan something for your birthday next month. Just so you know, I'm a terrible secret keeper, so don't ask me about it. She disappeared into her room, leaving Caleb alone with the realization that his daughter had grown into someone confident and capable and ready to build her own life. Later that night, lying in bed next to Vivian in her Tribeca penthouse, Caleb stared at the ceiling and tried to process how much had changed in less than a year. What are you thinking about? Vivian asked, her head on his chest. How different everything is from when you showed up in Vermont. Good different or bad different? Terrifying different, but also good. He ran his fingers through her hair. A year ago, I was convinced the safest thing I could do was hide. Now I'm CSO of a major company, in a relationship with someone who terrifies and challenges me in equal measure, and my daughter's planning to stay in New York for college. Don't you having regrets? The opposite. I'm realizing that choosing safety over everything else wasn't actually safe at all. It was just slow-motion suffocation dressed up as stability. Vivian propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the windows. Emma told me something interesting the other day. What? She said you smile now. Real smiles. Not the careful ones you used to give when you were pretending to be okay. Vivian traced a finger along his jaw. She said it's like getting her real dad back after 4 years of living with a ghost. The observation hit hard. Caleb felt tears prick his eyes, the kind that came from grief and gratitude tangled together. I didn't realize I'd been a ghost. You weren't a ghost. You were surviving the only way you knew how. She kissed him gently. But you're not just surviving anymore. And watching you come back to life has been the most beautiful thing I've seen in years. Even with all the complications, the work stress and the gossip and the constant balancing act, especially with the complications, because they mean we're actually living instead of just existing. They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb didn't dream about loss. He dreamed about possibility. The next morning brought news that changed everything again. Vivian got a call at 6 a.m. from her lawyer, Patricia Kim, with an update on the federal investigation into Daniel and Marcus. They're both accepting plea deals, Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled fury. Daniel's cooperating fully in exchange for reduced charges. And what he's saying is going to be a problem. What kind of problem? Vivian asked, putting the call on speaker so Caleb could hear. He's claiming the board knew about the breaches, that several board members actively encouraged him to undermine your leadership because they wanted to force you out and take the company public against your wishes. Vivian's face went pale. That's insane. Is it? Because I've been reviewing correspondence between Daniel and certain board members, and there are some very suggestive emails about necessary transitions and leadership changes that serve the company's best interests. Who? Caleb asked. Helen Martinez, Richard Cho, and Amanda Foster. 3 of your 7 board members. Patricia paused. If Daniel's telling the truth, this wasn't just 2 rogue executives. This was a coordinated effort involving your board of directors. Vivian sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, her hand shaking slightly. They wanted me gone. They wanted the company public. You were the obstacle. Patricia's voice softened. I'm sorry, Vivian. I know this is a betrayal on top of betrayal. What are my options? Legally, you can pursue action against the board members involved. Practically, you need to decide if you want to fight this or if you want to walk away before it destroys you. I'm not walking away. Then prepare for war, because this is going to get ugly. The call ended and Vivian sat in silence for a long moment. Caleb moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. I trusted them, she said quietly. Helen's been on the board since the beginning. Richard invested when we had nothing. Amanda was my mentor when I was starting out, and they all conspired to destroy me. Not destroy, remove. There's a difference. Is there? She looked at him. They decided I wasn't fit to lead the company I built, that my vision was wrong and their profit motive was right. How is that different from destruction? Because they wanted the company to survive. They just didn't want you leading it. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, it's supposed to help you understand their motivation so you can fight them effectively. Caleb squeezed her hand. You're not fighting people who want to destroy Laurent's security. You're fighting people who want to control it. That's a different battle. Vivian was quiet, processing. Then her expression hardened into something Caleb recognized. The look she got when she was done being hurt and ready to start breaking things. Call Patricia back, she said. Tell her I want a full audit of every board member's communications for the last 2 years. If they conspired against me, I want documentation. And then I want to call a special board meeting where I remove every single one of them. You can't remove your entire board. Watch me. Vivian, they betrayed me, Caleb. They sided with the people who sabotaged my company, manipulated my employees, and destroyed client relationships. They don't get to sit in judgment of my leadership anymore. She stood pacing. I'm done playing nice. I'm done trusting people who smile to my face while planning my removal. If they want war, I'll give them war. Caleb recognized the fury driving her words. He'd felt it himself after Rachel died, that burning need to fight back against unfairness, to make someone pay for the pain. But he'd also learned that fury without strategy was just another way of hurting yourself. Before you go to war, he said carefully, make sure you're fighting for the right reasons. Are you fighting to save the company or fighting to punish people who hurt you? Vivian stopped pacing. Does it matter? Well, yeah, it matters. He stood and moved to her. One of those fights you can win. The other one just makes you into someone you'll hate. She stared at him for a long moment, anger and pain and exhaustion warring across her face. Then she collapsed against him, and he held her while she shook with silent tears. I'm so tired of being betrayed, she whispered. I'm tired of trusting people and having them prove I was stupid to believe in them. You're not stupid. You're human. Well, same difference sometimes. They stood there together while the sun rose over Manhattan, 2 people who'd spent too long believing that success meant sacrificing trust. Learning, slowly and painfully, that maybe the real betrayal was convincing yourself that isolation was strength. What would you do? Vivian asked finally. If you were me, I'd document everything, build an airtight case. Then I'd give the board members involved one chance to resign quietly before going public with what they did. He pulled back to look at her, not because they deserve mercy, because you deserve to move forward instead of getting stuck in a legal battle that destroys the next 2 years of your life. That's very mature of you. I learned it the hard way. After Rachel died, I wanted to punish the world for taking her. Instead, I just punished myself and Emma by hiding from everything. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Don't make my mistake. Don't let other people's betrayal turn you into someone you're not. Vivian nodded slowly, then pulled out her phone and called Patricia back. I want documentation on the board members involved, she said. Everything they said, every email they sent, every meeting where they discussed removing me. But I'm not going to war. I'm giving them one chance to resign before I expose them. That's generous, Patricia said. It's strategic. I want them gone, but I don't want to spend the next 2 years in court when I could be building something better. I'll start pulling the documentation today. The next week was a masterclass in controlled fury. Patricia assembled evidence that made it clear Helen, Richard, and Amanda had not only known about Daniel's plan, but had actively encouraged it. Vivian confronted each of them privately, gave them 48 hours to submit their resignations, and then replaced them with board members who actually believed in her vision for the company. The press called it a corporate shakeup. Vivian called it survival. Through it all, Caleb watched her navigate betrayal with a combination of ruthlessness and grace that reminded him why he'd fallen for her in the first place. She was brilliant and fierce and absolutely unwilling to let other people's failures define her future. And slowly, as the dust settled and new board members took their seats and the company stabilized into something stronger than it had been before, Vivian started to relax in ways Caleb had never seen. She took weekends off. Actually off. Not just working from her apartment instead of her office. She had dinner with Caleb and Emma regularly instead of treating meals as business meetings. She smiled more, laughed more, started talking about the future like it was something to anticipate instead of survive. "You know what's weird?" she said one evening while they were having dinner at the apartment, the three of them around the table like an accidental family. "What?" Emma asked. "I spent 8 years building a company and convinced myself that was enough. That success meant sacrifice and loneliness was the price of ambition." Vivian looked between Caleb and Emma. "But sitting here with you two, eating takeout and talking about nothing important, this feels more valuable than any board meeting I've ever had." "That's because it is more valuable," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Board meetings are just people arguing about money. This is actual life." "When did you get so wise?" Vivian asked. "Everyone keeps asking me that." Emma laughed. "I've always been wise. Adults just don't listen to teenagers." They finished dinner and Emma retreated to her room to work on college applications, leaving Caleb and Vivian alone with the comfortable silence that had become their default state. "Thank you," Vivian said quietly. "For what?" "For showing up when I needed you. For not letting me destroy myself fighting battles that didn't matter. For reminding me that success means nothing if you're alone at the end." She took his hand. "I know I hired you to save my company, but you ended up saving something more important." "What's that?" "Me." "Well, Mud." 2 years felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. Caleb stood in the apartment that no longer felt temporary, packing the last of his belongings into boxes marked Vermont in Emma's careful handwriting. The farmhouse had finally sold after sitting on the market for 18 months. Some young couple from Boston bought it, planning to renovate and turn it into their dream home, the same way Caleb and Rachel had once planned. "You okay?" Vivian asked from the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Yeah." He took the coffee gratefully. "Just weird, you know? That house was supposed to be forever. And now it's just a place someone else gets to build their life in." "Forever's overrated anyway." She sat on the arm of the couch. "People change. Lives change. Clinging to what was supposed to be just keeps you from seeing what could be." "When did you become a philosopher?" "Around the same time I stopped working 80-hour weeks and actually had time to think." She sipped her coffee. "The closing's at 2, right?" "Yeah, my lawyer said it should be straightforward. Sign some papers, hand over the keys, walk away with a check I don't really need. So what are you going to do with the money?" Caleb had been thinking about that question for weeks. The farmhouse sale would net him about $400,000 after fees and taxes. Combined with the $5 million Vivian had paid him 2 years ago, he had more money than he'd ever imagined having. Enough to do something meaningful. Enough to matter. "I want to start a foundation," he said, "for families dealing with terminal illness. Help with medical bills, counseling, practical support. All the things Rachel and I needed but couldn't afford." Vivian's expression softened. "That's perfect." "Emma helped me come up with the idea. She said Mom would have wanted her death to mean something beyond just loss." He set down his coffee. "I'm calling it the Rachel Hayes Foundation, if that's not too sentimental." "It's exactly the right amount of sentimental." Vivian moved to sit next to him properly. "You want help setting it up? I know some lawyers who specialize in nonprofits." "You don't have to. I want to. Besides, you helped save my company. Least I can do is help you build something that matters." They sat together in comfortable silence. the kind that came from 2 years of learning each other's rhythms and moods and unspoken languages. The apartment was nearly empty now. Emma had moved into her NYU dorm 3 weeks earlier, taking most of the chaos and energy with her. What remained felt deliberately quiet, like the space was waiting to be filled with whatever came next. "I've been thinking," Vivian said carefully, in the tone that meant she'd been thinking about something for a while and was finally ready to say it out loud. "About?" "About us. About this." She gestured vaguely at the apartment, at the life they'd built together in stolen moments between work and crisis, and learning to be people who could trust again. "We've been doing this for 2 years, dating but living separately, spending most nights together but keeping our own spaces. And I'm wondering if maybe it's time to stop hedging our bets." Caleb's heart kicked up a notch. "What are you suggesting?" "Yeah. I'm suggesting we stop pretending this is casual. We get a place together. Actually together, not just you staying at my place 4 nights a week and me staying at yours 3. She met his eyes. "I'm suggesting we choose this deliberately instead of just letting it happen by accident. You want to move in together. I want to build a life together. Moving in is just the practical first step." She took his hand. "But only if you want that too. I know you've been careful about keeping some independence, about not losing yourself the way you did after Rachel died. I don't want to pressure you into something you're not ready for." "Mis y tas." Caleb thought about the question. 2 years ago, the idea of committing to someone this completely would have terrified him, would have felt like tempting fate and inviting loss. But somewhere in the chaos of saving Vivian's company and watching Emma thrive and learning that wanting things didn't automatically mean losing them, he'd stopped being afraid. "I want that," he said. "I want to wake up next to you every morning instead of just most mornings. I want to fight about whose turn it is to do the dishes and argue about whether we need another bookshelf. I want all the boring, ordinary, beautiful parts of building a life with someone." Vivian smiled, and it transformed her face into something that still took his breath away even after 2 years. "Good, because I already started looking at apartments." "Of course you did. I'm decisive. It's one of my better qualities." She pulled out her phone and showed him listings. "I was thinking Brooklyn. Closer to Emma's school, more space than Manhattan, actual trees on some streets." They spent the next hour looking at apartments on her phone, debating neighborhood character and commute times and whether they really needed 3 bedrooms or if 2 would suffice. It felt domestic and normal and exactly right. The closing on the Vermont farmhouse went exactly as predicted, straightforward and slightly sad. Caleb signed papers transferring ownership to people he'd never met, shook hands with lawyers, and accepted a check that represented the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. On the drive back to the city, he called Emma. "Hey, Dad," she answered, her voice bright. "How'd it go?" "It went. The house is officially sold." "How do you feel?" "Lighter than I expected, like I've been carrying something heavy and finally got permission to put it down." Shabaos one. He merged onto the highway. "You doing okay? Settling into the dorm?" "It's amazing. My roommate's kind of messy, but also kind of hilarious. We stayed up until 3 last morning talking about whether reality is objective or just collective hallucination." That sounds very college. "It is very college. I love it." She paused. "Sarah and I are planning to grab coffee later if you want to join. She's asking about the foundation you're starting." "She is?" "Yeah. Apparently her aunt died of cancer last year, and she thinks what you're doing is important." Emma's voice went softer. "I told her about Mom. Hope that's okay." "Of course it's okay. Mom's story isn't a secret." "I know. But I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with me sharing it." Caleb felt his throat tighten. His daughter, thinking about his feelings even while building her own independent life. "I'm comfortable, and I'm proud of you for talking about hard things instead of hiding from them." "I learned from the best," Emma said, echoing the words she'd said 2 years earlier that had landed so differently then. "Let me know about coffee. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, kiddo." He hung up and drove in silence for a while, processing. Emma was thriving in ways that made every risk he'd taken feel worthwhile. She'd found friends who challenged her intellectually, professors who recognized her talent, a city that felt big enough to hold all her ambitions and weird enough to appreciate her quirks. She'd also found peace with Rachel's death in a way Caleb was still learning. Emma talked about her mother easily now, sharing memories without the weight of trauma crushing them. She'd told Caleb once that moving to New York had helped her separate grief from identity, that being in a place where no one knew her as the girl whose mom died had let her figure out who she was beyond loss. "I'm still her daughter," Emma had said, "but I'm also a photographer and a friend and a person who exists independently of tragedy. Vermont never let me be that." Caleb understood. Vermont had been safe, but suffocating. New York was chaotic, but liberating. The difference mattered. Back at the apartment, he found Vivian on her laptop, reviewing security protocols for a new client Laurent Security had just signed. She looked up when he entered, reading his face with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned his moods. "The house is gone," she said. It wasn't a question. The house is gone. "How does it feel?" "Cuz, like closure. Finally." He sat next to her and she closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. "I kept that house as a shrine to everything I'd lost. Selling it feels like permission to stop mourning and start living. You've been living for 2 years. Pshim opris ispochgate. I've been trying to live. There's a difference." He took her hand. "Trying feels temporary, like you're testing whether happiness is real or just a brief reprieve before the next disaster. Actually, living means believing the good things get to last. Do you believe that now?" "I'm starting to." He squeezed her hand. "Helps that the good things keep proving themselves real." They spent the evening looking at apartments in Brooklyn, actually visiting them this time instead of just scrolling through listings. They saw a renovated brownstone with exposed brick and original hardwood floors, a modern condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman, a quirky loft in a converted factory with weird angles and character for days. By the time they reached the 5th apartment, Caleb's brain was full of square footage and natural light in commute times. But Vivian looked energized, her analytical mind cataloging pros and cons with the same intensity she applied to business strategy. "This one," she said, standing in the living room of a 3-bedroom apartment in Park Slope. "This is the one." "What makes you so sure?" "It has space for your foundation office, a room for Emma when she visits, enough kitchen for both of us to cook without murdering each other. And look at that backyard." She pointed to the small garden visible through the back windows. "Actual grass in Brooklyn. That's basically a miracle." Caleb looked around the space, trying to imagine their lives filling it. Morning coffee in the kitchen, work calls in the office, Emma coming home for weekends and holidays, Vivian reading on the couch while he cooked dinner. All the ordinary moments that added up to a life. "You're right," he said. "This is the one." They put in an offer that night, and by the following week, it was accepted. The apartment would be theirs by the end of the month, which meant they had 4 weeks to pack up their separate lives and merge them into something shared. Emma helped them move, recruiting her college friends to carry boxes and assemble furniture in exchange for pizza and beer. The apartment filled with chaos and laughter and the particular brand of disorder that came from combining 2 people's belongings into one space. "Where do you want the photos?" Emma asked, holding a box marked Rachel, Memories. Caleb had been dreading this moment. The photos of Rachel felt sacred and private, but they also deserved to be visible. She'd been part of his life, part of Emma's life. Pretending otherwise felt like erasure. "The hallway," he said, "between the living room and the bedrooms. So she's part of the house, but not the center of it." Emma nodded approvingly. Mom would have liked that. Being present without being the whole story. They hung the photos together, Rachel laughing at their wedding, Rachel holding newborn Emma, Rachel and Caleb on their last vacation before she got sick. They hung them alongside photos of Emma's artwork, pictures from Caleb and Vivian's adventures over the past 2 years, and a candid shot of all 3 of them at Emma's photography exhibition. The hallway became a timeline, past and present existing together without conflict. Proof that honoring what was lost didn't mean you couldn't embrace what was found. By the time they finished unpacking, the apartment felt like home in a way Caleb hadn't expected. Not because it was perfect, there were still boxes in corners and furniture that didn't quite fit, but because it was deliberately chosen. A space they'd built together instead of inherited or defaulted into. That night, After Emma and her friends left and the chaos settled into quiet, Caleb and Vivian sat on their new couch, drinking wine and looking at the backyard garden lit by string lights they'd hung earlier. "We did it," Vivian said softly. "Did what?" "Built something real, together." She leaned against him. 2 years ago, I was convinced I was incapable of maintaining a relationship. That work would always win, and I'd always end up alone. But here we are, living together, planning futures, proving I was wrong about myself. You were never incapable. You just needed to find someone stubborn enough to call you out when you were choosing work over life. And someone patient enough to let me learn at my own pace. She looked up at him. "Thank you for that. For not giving up when I was difficult." "You weren't difficult. You were scared. There's a difference." They finished their wine and went to bed in their new bedroom, in their new home, in the life they'd chosen deliberately. And Caleb slept better than he had in years. The Rachel Hayes Foundation officially launched 6 months later, on what would have been Rachel's 41st birthday. The launch event was small and intimate, held at a community center in Brooklyn with about 50 people in attendance, family support groups, social workers, hospital administrators, people who understood intimately what families facing terminal illness needed. Emma gave a speech about her mother that was honest and heartbreaking and hopeful all at once. "My mom died when I was 10, she said, standing at a small podium with the kind of composure that made Caleb's chest hurt with pride. "And for a long time, that was my whole identity. I was the girl whose mom died. The girl everyone pitied. The girl who didn't know how to talk about normal things because tragedy was the only thing that felt real." She paused, looking out at the audience. "My dad dealt with it by hiding. We moved to Vermont and built a life so small and safe that nothing could hurt us, which sounds good in theory, but in practice just meant we were both slowly suffocating under the weight of unprocessed grief." Caleb felt Vivian take his hand, squeezing gently. "This foundation exists because my dad finally learned that honoring my mom didn't mean staying stuck in the moment we lost her," Emma continued. "It meant taking everything she taught us about kindness and resilience and using it to help other families going through the same nightmare we lived through, so that maybe they don't have to feel as alone as we did." Setseman. She looked directly at Caleb. "Mom would have loved this, not because it has her name on it, but because it turns our worst experience into something that helps people." And that's who she was, someone who believed suffering should lead to compassion, not bitterness. The audience applauded, and Emma stepped down from the podium with tears in her eyes that she didn't bother hiding. Caleb pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than was probably appropriate for a formal event, but he didn't care. "She'd be so proud of you," he whispered. "She'd be proud of both of us," Emma whispered back. The foundation started small, helping 5 families in its first month, then 12, then 23. Word spread through hospital social workers and oncology departments and support groups. Stories came back of medical bills paid, therapy sessions funded, practical help provided when families were too overwhelmed to ask for it. Every thank you note that arrived at the foundation office felt like vindication, like proof that Rachel's death hadn't been meaningless, like something beautiful could grow from soil fertilized by grief. Caleb split his time between the foundation and his role as CSO at Laurent Security, learning to balance 2 professional identities instead of letting one consume him entirely. Vivian had restructured the company over the past 2 years, bringing in new leadership that actually shared her vision instead of fighting it. Sarah Chen had thrived as COO, implementing operational changes that made the company more efficient without sacrificing ethics. The board was stable. The clients were happy. The stock price had recovered and then exceeded previous highs. Laurent Security had become exactly what Vivian dreamed it could be, a company that protected people and made money without compromising its values. And Vivian herself had become someone who could lead without sacrificing everything else that mattered. "I never thought I'd say this," she told Caleb one evening while they were cooking dinner together, "but I'm actually happy, like genuinely, consistently happy, instead of just occasionally satisfied with my accomplishments." "What changed?" "I stopped measuring my worth by quarterly earnings and client acquisitions. Started measuring it by whether I'm becoming someone I actually like." She stirred the pasta sauce. "Turns out those are very different metrics." "And do you like who you're becoming?" "Yeah, I really do." She looked at him. I like being someone who has dinner with her partner instead of working until midnight. I like being someone who takes Emma to photography shows and actually understands what she's trying to say with her art. I like being someone who runs a successful company without letting it consume my entire identity. That's because you finally learned what I spent 4 years refusing to learn, Caleb said. Which is? That balance isn't about choosing between work and life. It's about integrating them so one informs the other instead of destroying it. He took the spoon from her and tasted the sauce, adding more salt. You needed to learn that success without connection is hollow. I needed to learn that safety without risk is suffocating. We both had to fail at our respective strategies before we could find something better. Listen to you, being all philosophical. I learned from the best. He kissed her cheek. Plus, Emma's been sending me articles about work-life integration and healthy relationship dynamics. Apparently, she's decided we're her project. Smart kid. The smartest. They finished cooking and ate dinner on their back patio, watching the sun set over Brooklyn and talking about nothing particularly important. And Caleb realized this was the life he'd been too afraid to want 2 years ago. Simple and complicated and beautifully ordinary all at once. The second year of the foundation was bigger than the first. They helped over 300 families, expanded to cover not just medical bills, but also counseling, childcare, and practical support like meal delivery and transportation. Emma volunteered her photography skills to document families' stories with their permission, creating a visual archive that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. One of those families was the Johnsons, a couple in their 30s with 2 young kids and a father facing stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The foundation covered their medical bills, connected them with counseling services, and provided practical support that let the mother keep her job while caring for her dying husband. When Mark Johnson died 6 months after the foundation started helping them, his wife Sarah sent Caleb a letter that he kept in his desk drawer and reread whenever he doubted whether the work mattered. "You gave us something more valuable than money," she wrote. "You gave us dignity. You let Mark die knowing his family wouldn't be destroyed financially by his illness. You let me focus on being his wife instead of constantly panicking about how we'd survive. You gave my kids memories of their father's last months that aren't entirely consumed by fear and chaos. That's a gift I can never repay." Caleb showed the letter to Vivian, who read it with tears in her eyes. "This is what meaning looks like," she said, handing it back. "Not stock prices or client acquisitions or board approval. This. Actual human impact. You have human impact too," Caleb reminded her. "You employ 347 people who depend on your company for their livelihoods. You protect clients from security threats that could destroy them. That matters. I know it matters. But it matters differently than this." She gestured to the letter. "This is personal, individual, intimate. This is helping people in their worst moments instead of just protecting them from abstract threats." So start your own foundation. You have the money and the platform. Vivian was quiet for a moment, considering, what would I even focus on? What breaks your heart? What keeps you up at night? So, honestly, kids who are brilliant but poor, who have the potential to do incredible things but don't have access to the resources or connections to make it happen. Her voice picked up energy. "I was lucky. My parents were rich. I had every advantage. But I've met so many people over the years who were smarter than me, more creative than me, more driven than me, but they never got the chance because they were born into poverty. So fund them, create scholarships or mentorship programs or whatever it takes to give them the chances they deserve." You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. He took her hand. "You spent 8 years building a company. You know how to build things. Just point that energy at something that matters beyond profit." 2 months later, Vivian announced the Laurent Opportunity Fund, a program that provided full scholarships, mentorship, and career support to brilliant students from low-income backgrounds who wanted to work in technology. The first cohort was 20 students. By the second year, it was 50. By the third year, it was over 100. Emma photographed the students for the program's promotional materials, capturing their determination and hope, and the particular kind of hunger that came from knowing you were capable of more than your circumstances suggested. The photographs were stunning, raw and honest, and completely free of the inspirational poverty porn that usually characterized charitable campaigns. "These are people, not projects," Emma explained when showing Caleb and Vivian her work. "I wanted to show their humanity and their ambition without reducing them to their struggles." You succeeded," Vivian said quietly, looking at a portrait of a 17-year-old girl from the Bronx who'd taught herself to code and dreamed of starting her own cybersecurity company. "This is exactly right." Between the Rachel Hayes Foundation and the Laurent Opportunity Fund, Caleb and Vivian found themselves spending significant time in the philanthropic world. They attended fundraisers and charity galas and networking events full of wealthy people trying to buy meaning through strategic generosity. "This is weird," Caleb whispered to Vivian at one particularly pretentious event where the champagne cost more than most people's monthly rent. "What's weird?" "Bull. Being the people who belong here, having enough money that we can actually make a difference instead of just wishing we could. Does it make you uncomfortable?" "A little. Feels like I should be doing more. Like having this much while others have so little is fundamentally wrong." He watched a woman in a dress that probably cost $50,000 laugh at something her companion said. "How do you reconcile it? Being wealthy in a world full of poverty? Oui." "You don't reconcile it. You just try to do less harm and more good than the average person with your resources." Vivian sipped her champagne. "I'm not going to pretend wealth doesn't come with moral complications, but I'd rather have it and use it to help people than not have it and be powerless to change anything." "That's a convenient justification." "It's an honest justification. There's a difference." She met his eyes. "You want to give away all your money and live like a monk? Do it, I won't judge. But I think you can do more good keeping enough to live comfortably while using the rest strategically than you can martyring yourself to prove a point." Caleb knew she was right. He'd spent 4 years in Vermont living on barely anything, and all it had accomplished was making him and Emma miserable. Having resources meant having options. Having options meant being able to help people in ways that actually mattered instead of just feeling virtuous about your own poverty. "You're right," he admitted. "I usually am." She grinned. "One of my more annoying qualities." They left the gala early, stopping for pizza at a hole-in-the-wall place in the East Village, where nobody cared who they were or how much money they had. They ate greasy slices on the sidewalk and watched the city move around them. And Caleb realized this was the version of wealth he could live with. Having enough to help people and enough left over for greasy pizza and a life that felt real instead of performative. Emma graduated from NYU with honors and a job offer from a prestigious photography agency that wanted her to document social issues for their editorial clients. She turned them down. "I want to freelance," she told Caleb over dinner at the Brooklyn apartment. "Work on projects I actually care about instead of assignments someone else thinks are important." "That's risky," Vivian pointed out. "I know, but I've watched you two build careers around meaning instead of just security. Seems like the right example to follow." Emma speared a piece of chicken. "Plus," Emma speared a samasya. "I have some savings, and the foundation said they'd hire me to document families' stories. Between that and wedding photography and editorial work I actually care about, I think I can make it work." "You're sure?" Caleb asked. "I'm sure. Life's too short to spend it doing work that doesn't matter just because it's safe." She looked at her father. "I learned that from you, actually. Watching you leave Vermont and choose risk over safety, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Caleb felt his throat tighten. "I was terrified the entire time." "I know. That's what made it brave." Emma smiled. "Courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing it anyway because something matters more than your fear." See? "When did you get so wise?" he asked, hearing the echo of every other time he'd asked that question. "I've always been wise," Emma repeated with a grin. "You're just finally listening." She moved into her own apartment in Brooklyn the following month, a tiny studio that cost too much and had a radiator that clanged like a prisoner trying to escape, but it was hers. Her space. Her declaration of independence. Caleb helped her move, carrying boxes up 4 flights of stairs and trying not to feel like he was losing her, even though he knew this was exactly what success looked like. "I'm not disappearing," Emma said when he'd made his 3rd trip up the stairs. I'm literally 15 minutes away. I know. And you're going to see me all the time because I'm still photographing for the foundation. I know. So why do you look like I'm moving to another country? Caleb set down the box and looked at his daughter, 22 years old, confident, talented, ready to build her own life. Because watching you grow up and not need me anymore is harder than I expected. I'll always need you, Dad. Just differently than I needed you when I was 10 and scared and didn't know how to exist without Mom. She hugged him. You did good. You raised someone who's capable and independent and knows how to take care of herself. That's the goal, right? Yeah, that's the goal. Then stop being sad about achieving it. They finished moving her in, and Caleb left her apartment feeling both proud and hollow. Vivian was waiting in the car, reading something on her phone. How's she doing? Vivian asked. Great. She's absolutely great. Caleb got in and closed the door, which makes me feel ancient and unnecessary. You're not unnecessary. You're just transitioning from essential to important. There's a difference, is there? Yeah. Essential means she can't function without you. Important means she can function, but she chooses to keep you in her life anyway. Important is better, even though it feels worse. Vivian reached over and took his hand. You gave her roots and wings. Now you get to watch her fly instead of holding her up. That's success, even if it doesn't feel like it. They drove back to Brooklyn in comfortable silence, and Caleb processed the particular brand of grief that came from successful parenting. You spent years building someone strong enough to not need you, then had to figure out who you were when the primary purpose of your life transformed into something optional. What do we do now? He asked when they reached the apartment. What do you mean? Emma's independent. The foundation's running smoothly. Laurent's security is stable. We've solved all the problems we were supposed to solve. He looked at Vivian. What's next? She thought about it for a moment, then smiled. Whatever we want. That's the whole point of building a stable life. It gives you freedom to choose what matters instead of just reacting to crises. So what do you want? Honestly, I want to travel. See parts of the world I missed while building the company. Take time off without feeling guilty about it. She squeezed his hand. I want to be someone who has experiences instead of just accomplishments. That sounds good. Yeah? Yeah. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. Permission to want things beyond survival and responsibility. Where should we go first? They ended up in Italy 3 months later, spending 2 weeks wandering through Rome and Florence and small Tuscan villages that felt frozen in time. Vivian spoke terrible Italian and insisted on ordering at every restaurant, mangling pronunciation so badly that waiters either laughed or pretended not to understand until Caleb intervened. They got lost in Venice, sunburned in the Amalfi Coast, and drunk on wine so good it made everything they'd ever consumed in America taste like gasoline. It was the first real vacation Caleb had taken since Rachel got sick, the first time he'd allowed himself to exist in the present, instead of constantly planning for disasters that might never come. One evening, sitting at a small restaurant overlooking the Mediterranean, Vivian reached across the table and took his hand. I want to marry you, she said. Not a question, just a statement of fact. Caleb's brain stuttered. What? I want to marry you. Make this official. Stop calling you my partner and start calling you my husband. She said it calmly, like she was presenting a business proposal instead of completely changing the trajectory of their lives. But only if you want that too. I'm not interested in marriage for marriage's sake. I'm interested in building something permanent with someone I actually like. You like me? I love you, you idiot. But yes, I also like you, which is rarer and more important. She was smiling now. So what do you think? Want to make this weird little family we've built official? Caleb thought about Rachel, who he'd loved completely and lost devastatingly. He thought about the 4 years he'd spent convinced that loving someone again would dishonor her memory. He thought about Emma's words about courage being doing something despite fear. Yes, he said, I want to marry you. They got engaged in Italy and married 6 months later in a small ceremony in the Brooklyn apartment's backyard garden. Emma officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose. The guest list was intimate. Sarah Chen and a few other Laurent security employees, Emma's college friends, people from the foundation, Vivian's few remaining family members who'd bothered to show up. No elaborate production. No expensive venue. Just two people who'd spent years learning how to trust again, choosing each other deliberately in front of the people who mattered. Emma's speech as officiant was characteristically honest. My dad and Vivian spent 20 years apart, both convinced they were better off alone, she said, standing between them with her officiant's certificate printed from the internet. My dad hid in Vermont. Vivian hid in her company. Both of them built impressive walls around their hearts and called it strength. She looked at Caleb, then Vivian. But real strength isn't protecting yourself from pain. It's choosing to be vulnerable again after you've been hurt. It's opening the door during a blizzard when someone from your past shows up asking for help. It's believing that good things can last, even though you've learned firsthand that nothing lasts forever. Caleb felt tears running down his face and didn't bother wiping them away. So here's what I want to say, Emma continued. Marriage isn't a finish line where everything becomes easy. It's a choice you make every day to keep showing up for someone even when it's hard, to keep choosing vulnerability over safety, to keep believing that love is worth the risk of loss. She turned to Caleb. Dad, do you choose Vivian? Every day, even when she's difficult and obsessed with work, and sometimes forgets to eat because she's too focused on solving problems? I do, Caleb said, his voice rough. Emma turned to Vivian. Vivian, do you choose my dad? Every day. Even when he's overthinking everything and occasionally gets stuck in grief and still can't solve basic algebra? Vivian laughed through tears. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the internet, I declare you married. Kiss each other before I start crying and ruin my makeup. They kissed while their small gathering of guests cheered, and Caleb realized this was the life he'd been too afraid to imagine when Vivian first appeared at his farmhouse door. Not perfect. Not without complications or hard days or moments of doubt, but real and chosen and worth every risk he'd taken to get here. The reception was small and chaotic. Too much wine, too much food. Emma's friends taking over the music and turning the backyard into an impromptu dance party. At some point, Caleb found himself standing at the edge of it all, watching Vivian laugh at something Sarah said, watching Emma dance with her friends, watching all these lives overlap and intersect. You did good, man, a voice said beside him. He turned to find Marcus, Emma's friend from college, not Marcus Webb, the traitor CFFO, holding a beer and looking philosophical in the way drunk 20-somethings sometimes did. Did good how? Caleb asked. Built a life that actually matters. Most people spend their whole lives chasing success or safety, never figuring out that meaning comes from the people you choose and the impact you make. Marcus took a sip of beer. Emma talks about you all the time, about how you chose to risk everything to help someone who needed you, how you turned your worst loss into something that helps other people. That's rare. I just did what I had to do. Nah, man, lots of people go through tragedy and it makes them smaller, bitter, closed off. You went through it and somehow came out bigger. That's not just doing what you had to do. That's choosing to grow instead of shrink. Ooh. Marcus wandered off to rejoin the dancing, leaving Caleb with his observation. And Caleb realized the kid was right. He could have stayed in Vermont forever, safe and small and slowly suffocating. Instead, he'd chosen risk, chosen growth, chosen to believe that life could be more than just managing fear. Later that night, after the guests left and the backyard was quiet again, Caleb and Vivian sat on their back patio under string lights that had somehow survived the party. We did it, Vivian said, leaning against him. Did what? Built something worth having, together. She intertwined her fingers with his. 2 years ago, I thought success meant my company's valuation and my name in Forbes. Now I think it means this: sitting in our backyard after marrying someone I actually like, having a stepdaughter who's brilliant and independent, running a foundation that helps people, building a life that feels full instead of just accomplished. You know what's funny? Caleb said. What? The night you showed up in Vermont, I thought you were offering me money to solve your problems, but you were actually offering me permission to stop hiding. He kissed the top of her head. You saved me as much as I saved you. Then we're even. Not even close, but we can pretend. They sat in comfortable silence, and Caleb thought about the question Vivian had asked 2 years earlier, whether he was happy. Back then, he hadn't known how to answer. Happiness felt like a trap, a temporary reprieve before the next disaster. But sitting here, married to someone who challenged him and loved him in equal measure, building work that mattered, watching Emma thrive as an independent adult, this felt like something more durable than happiness. This felt like meaning. And maybe that was the real lesson. That hiding from pain didn't prevent it. It just prevented you from experiencing anything else too. That safety without risk was just slow-motion death. That the only way to honor loss was to keep living fully, despite knowing firsthand that nothing lasts forever. Rachel would have liked Vivian, Caleb realized. Would have appreciated her directness and her refusal to accept bullshit. Would have been glad that Caleb hadn't spent his entire life mourning instead of moving forward. You're thinking about her, Vivian said softly. It wasn't a question. Yeah. Well, that's okay. She's part of your story, part of what made you who you are. Vivian sat up to look at him. I never want you to feel like loving me means erasing her. She mattered. She still matters. You don't have to choose between honoring your past and building your future. How did you get so wise? I learned from experience. Turns out you can't build anything meaningful on top of unprocessed grief and avoidance. You have to actually deal with the hard stuff before you can move forward. She smiled. Plus, I've been going to therapy for 2 years. It helps. You're in therapy? Individual and couples counseling. Did you think we accidentally figured out how to have a healthy relationship? This shit takes work. Caleb laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Fair point. They eventually went inside, climbing the stairs to their bedroom in the home they'd chosen together. And Caleb fell asleep thinking about second chances and the particular courage it took to keep your heart open after learning exactly how badly it could break. 3 years after that night in the blizzard, when everything changed, Caleb stood in Central Park watching Emma photograph a family for the foundation. The father was dying, stage 4 lung cancer, maybe 6 months left. The mother looked exhausted and terrified. The 2 kids were trying to be brave and failing. Emma worked with them patiently, not trying to manufacture fake happiness, but capturing real moments of connection. A father holding his daughter's hand. A mother kissing her son's forehead. A family existing together in the truth of their situation without pretending everything was fine. That's my girl, Vivian said, standing next to Caleb with her hand in his. She's incredible. She learned from the best. They watched Emma work for a while longer, then walked through Central Park together, talking about nothing particularly important. The foundation was helping over 500 families now. The Laurent Opportunity Fund had sent 300 students to college. The company was stable and profitable, and actually living up to its values. Everything they'd built was working. Not perfectly, nothing worked perfectly, but well enough that they could stop constantly fighting crises and actually enjoy what they'd created. You know what I realized? Caleb said as they walked. What? The biggest decision of my life wasn't solving your corporate conspiracy or starting the foundation or any of the big dramatic moments. It was opening the door that night when you showed up in the blizzard. Because it led to everything else? Because it was the moment I chose risk over safety, connection over isolation. The possibility of something meaningful over the certainty of nothing hurt me. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Everything good in my life now comes from that one moment of choosing to trust you instead of protecting myself. Vivian kissed him gently. Then I'm glad you opened the door. Me too. They continued their walk through the park. 2 people who'd spent years learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was doing the terrifying thing anyway because something mattered more than your comfort. That success wasn't wealth or power or impressive titles. It was building a life that felt true instead of safe. That love wasn't a guarantee against loss. It was a choice to remain vulnerable despite knowing exactly how badly vulnerability could hurt. And somewhere in the messy, complicated, beautiful chaos of their lives, Caleb finally understood what Rachel had known all along. that the only way to truly live was to risk your heart completely. That safety was overrated and meaning was everything. That opening the door during a blizzard might be the scariest thing you ever do, but it might also be the thing that saves you. He'd spent 4 years building walls to protect himself from pain. Then Vivian had shown up and offered him something more valuable than protection. She'd offered him a reason to tear the walls down and try again. And he'd chosen to try, chosen to risk, chosen to believe that good things could last even though he knew firsthand they didn't always. That choice had made all the difference.